Hello again, everybody, and welcome inside the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. I am George, the Howitzer Gerbo.
And I am Mike, the Buzzsaw Asti.
Sports Talk back with you here as we grind through darkest month in the calendar. Hopefully, coming into some more light soon. We all need a little bit of sunlight in our lives. We hope to give you some sunlight here on the HBS through
Yeah, we're going to be
the holiday.
discussing some drama and maybe some darkness, but maybe give you some sunlight and some cheer here while you're listening to be entertained. But it's getting
Hilarity.
dark and it's pitch black at 4 p.m. So it's kind of in that annoying month, but we are now in 2025.
We aim to please here at the HBS. Been a fun championship season. Still kind of wrapping up here with what's going on in the world of football. Some of it has wrapped up. Some of it continues. We'll talk a little bit about that. Got some honorees to talk about. We love a good Hall of Fame talk and discussion. We got some of that for you too, and NBA drama. And there's no other kind of drama
There
than
you go.
NBA drama, really. There's
Yeah.
no, and unfortunately for the NBA this season, there's no really kind of interest other than drama in the NBA because
Yeah,
the games ain't been worth
very
watching
true.
at this point. So
Yeah, the
keep that.
pundits got to be happy to get some drama, and it looked like for a while maybe we weren't going to get any drama, but then Jimmy Butler saved the day. Had to give us some drama this season, and yeah, ratings numbers are down. Although they aren't the only sport with some numbers and
Mhm.
ratings down this year and 2024, and even into 2025 so far as well. So they're not alone.
We'll talk about all of that coming up here on this edition of the HBS. A reminder to you that you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. That includes on Apple, Google, TuneIn, Spotify, and more. Search Howitzer wherever you get your podcasts. Also, a shout out to our friend Kellen B. Conley. A happy belated birthday to Kellen B.
Oh
Conley,
yeah, yeah,
whose
yeah.
music you can hear right here on the HBS each and every time. Universe.com and podcastgroup.com.
Yeah, Kellen's getting older, but still a champion, just like the music that you hear here on the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show. You can also find us on social media at Howitzer Buzzsaw for the show handle throughout, at Gerbo3, at Mike Asti 11 for myself. And as I've been saying for a decade now plus in my career here and on the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show, and will continue to say in 2025, if you can't find us here in the HBS, you're just not trying hard enough. And really, if you can't find me or George, you're just not trying hard enough. So we're all over the place, and we continue here now into the new year.
We outside. Come find us.
Yeah.
Let's kick it off with the conclusion of the longest college football season in history. We can
Yeah.
actually finally
Yeah.
say it now.
Yeah.
Everything continues to expand and get bigger, and that has been the case with college football. We've completed the
The
inaugural year of the
2024 season, but really you could have that hyphen 2025 at this point because it almost went into February. But yeah.
we are we've completed the first year of the 12-team college football playoff. Ohio State defeats Notre Dame
Yep.
in a game that was more of a domination by Ohio State than the final score indicated. Notre Dame did come back to get it within a single possession at the end of the game, and then the Buckeyes able to pull it out and hang on for the victory, but didn't take much because their offense overpowered Notre Dame. Depleted Notre Dame team had been banged up with some injuries, especially on offensive line and on defense.
Yep.
So shout out to Notre Dame. 14, both of them 14-win seasons. Notre Dame's only loss, of course, that ridiculous, infamous loss now
Yeah.
to Northern Illinois that happened in the first month of the season.
So if you
And
use
the
the
Buckeyes,
transitive property, Northern Illinois claiming a title, because
yeah,
that's out there. The who beat who beat who beat who. Northern Illinois sits at the top. But yeah, that's a weird ass loss for sure.
Buckeyes losing along the way in the regular season to Oregon and Michigan. And
Yeah.
I, there's a lot of we'll delve into a whole bunch of things here about it. Good championship game, not amazing, not one for the history or the record books. You kind of alluded to talk about ratings. So some people saying that they were disappointed with the number. The 21, 22 million people watched this game. It was on a Monday. It was a federal holiday, both Martin Luther King Day and Inauguration Day.
It was
So you had
inauguration, yeah.
so you had a lot of things going on, but still, the lipstick on a pig side, or the positive side of the coin, is that is the most watched non-Super Bowl sporting event in the last year. Okay. 22 some million people, and the most also ended up being the most
What you
watched
did.
college. Yeah. And ended up being the most watched college football game of the season per the CFB
Yeah.
number. So game is what the game was. Teams are great. Both deserve to be there. Ohio State ends up beating 5 ranked teams or 5 top 10 teams in route to winning the national championship. They're a deserving champion. The folks in Ann Arbor get to hang over their head that they couldn't beat them during the
Yeah.
season. So everybody wins, I guess. But I guess besides the game, it's kind of like a good, and you could address the game if you'd like. Notre Dame goes on that huge 18-play drive that takes nearly the entire first quarter, very Army-like drive. And then Ohio State just comes back with, all right, we got weapons of mass destruction, and here's Jeremiah Smith, and here's Quinshon Judkins, and here's Travion Henderson, and pow, 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 Mecca Ibuka, and game's over. So Ohio State can score lightning quick. But besides the actual, what happened in the game, and yes, Ohio State's the champion, just kind of the overall, vibe of the first year of the 12 team, I liked it. Obviously, hey, can we adjust some things? You and I talked kind of extensively before it started about the seating apparatus and where you're at, and it does appear that there may be movement in that direction. And then also with the caveat that this could be going from 12 to 14 in as soon as the 26, 27 year. So as I understood it, we were doing 2 years with 12 here and then maybe going to 14. But again, we'll see how that looks and if any other changes are made. But yeah, seating could be made and some different things. But I think they got the teams right who were in the playoff. The playoff dictated the thing. Kind of sucks if you were Oregon or one of these teams that had the bye, like Georgia, another one, but they got beat by teams that end up in the national championship game. So can you tweak the schedule? Yes. Can you try and find some better windows to put the game? Some people complaining about a Monday. They've been playing it on a Monday pretty much for the advent of the CFP. And I can even remember, if I recall correctly, some BCS games back in the day.
Yeah, Monday's not that weird, but
Yeah, Monday's not that
inauguration was the
weird.
weirdness. But yeah.
That's the weird part. Yeah, it's been on like January 7th or 8th, like the first Monday after the end of the NFL season. Do you want to find a gap in there to schedule against the NFL or near the NFL, whatever? So I have less of a problem with that. I kind of like the college football. Nobody's really said this, like, oh, it's so long. I kind of like the college football went into the late January. You gave me, 2 extra weeks essentially past the end of when mentally the first week of January college football season has ended, and you gave it to me all the way late into the January calendar. I'm kind of cool with that. But just your thoughts overall on this on this national championship game and how this CFP went in year one of a 12-team format.
It's very, very interesting because you get Ohio State winning the national title over Notre Dame, and Ohio State's head coach, now a national championship head coach in Ryan Day. If you had the old system, even the 4-team playoff, not having to go to BCS or anything of the past, just even the 4-team playoff, he would have been fired. So instead of being fired after the Michigan loss, he ends up being a national champion. And obviously, knowing Ohio State fans, it's still going to be out on him midway through next year if he has a struggling game or they don't like something that happened during spring ball. So the fans don't love him that much, but he's now a national championship head coach, and it's because of the CFP. So the CFP expansion changed the dynamic of the sport. It allowed Ryan Day to stay on and then win a national championship, and it allowed Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. They didn't win a national title, but they had a really Cinderella story, and they did a lot more than people expected them to do. People even tried to argue they weren't overrated. They weren't really worthy to get in the playoff. That Northern Illinois exposed them, that should have been an eliminator because of their schedule or whatever. And they end up winning, and they end up getting there. And they did have injuries all through the offensive line. So speaking about the game, once you knew Notre Dame was so banged up and they lost multiple players in the Penn State victory, it looked like they weren't going to be able to handle Ohio State. Ohio State had a $20 million roster and had the most talent in the country. George, you could argue it's more surprising that Ohio State did not finally get off the snide and beat Michigan than it is that they won the national title. They were supposed to win the national championship most of the season. So Will Howard and Ryan Day standing up there, as everybody does after you win any title in the podium, saying everyone counted us out, no one believed in us. That's not true. Everyone believed in you. Everyone predicted you. People were surprised when you did lose games. So they're a deserving champion because they took advantage of the playoff format, but it's very interesting. They wouldn't have been in the 14 playoff. Notre Dame actually wouldn't have been in there either because of different rules, even though I could argue maybe they should have, but Ohio State wouldn't have deserved to be there after the Michigan loss. And they end up winning a national championship, and that changes the course of that program. But Notre Dame put up a valiant effort. Ohio State was the best team, the most talented team. They put a whooping on them. And part of their playoff run, they were able to avenge their other loss. So they lost to open up the season to Oregon, who was the head and shoulders best team all the way through and deserved the number one ranking. And weirdly so, one of the major selectors actually finally did make them the number one team. So they could, if they wanted, they actually could claim a national championship and be co-champs. It would be very similar to what some other programs have done that we've talked about on this show. It does not appear they're going to. I actually did ask some SID sources that I have. It does not appear they're going to, but Wikipedia gives them the unclaimed title if you care about that. So the Wolf rankings, they did put them as number one, and their only loss all year, George, was to the national champion Ohio State Buckeyes, who won the tournament, as the Wolf rankings put it, or won the college football
who
playoff.
They beat once, yeah, go 1-1 against
And
the
who they
national
also
champ.
beat. So if you want to go body of work, which is what we did for 100+ years before we get to a playoff now, even before the 4-teamer and before BCS, it was always pure just body of work opinions. If you want to do body of work, George, you could argue that Oregon has a claim. I'm not saying I would advocate for it. I don't think they're going to claim it. It's not like a group of five type of situation where you're never going to be there, so you put the fake claim up. They're a big boy major program. They should be able to compete for these things every year, even though the history of the program doesn't dictate that. But the last 20 years with the Phil Knight money, they've been able to get into almost arguably blue blood status. Although if you look at their overall history, it's basically similar to West Virginia, for example. They haven't been there throughout 100+ years, but with the money they have now, the last decade plus, they're there. So they're not going to claim a chintzy championship. But if you look at body of work, they have the ranked wins. They won the Big Ten, the same conference the national champion is in, and they won it over multiple teams that are in the playoff. Penn State didn't win it. They're in. Ohio State didn't win it. They're in. And they won it first year in the Big Ten, so they have that. And then their only loss is to Ohio State, who they also beat. So they're 1-1 against Ohio State. So they could do it, but they're not. So that's an interesting aside as well for the end of the year, that I told you, I warned you that even when, and they're not going to claim, but even when we expanded, I told you it does not mean teams, we would not have these situations that could argue claiming. And it's almost easier now, because if you get in from winning a conference and you have a great record, but then you don't get to play anymore, and maybe you have a head-to-head or whatever similar situation, you're going to have this again. But it didn't end up really being an issue now with them not claiming, but that's kind of funny. And Ohio State wins the national title. And I do like a 12-team playoff. I originally said that I wish they would have went from 4 to 8. I think that would have been, I think I still would have preferred them to go to 4 to 8. And mostly, George, we talked about this on the last show before the CFP really got fully underway, that I do believe there were some overrated teams that got in the CFP. And you're going to have that when you have a 12-team playoff. So I don't necessarily have a problem with who got in, even though I do have a problem with the seeding, and that does appear now going to get corrected. But Indiana didn't beat anybody all year. I mean, they had a great year. Carsonetti, deserving coach of the year. The program has 3 bowl wins, and they had the best season in program history in a century plus. Kudos to them. But they have no quality win. Boise State, they had a close game with Oregon that, was obviously a great team. That was impressive. But then they got mollywopped by Penn State once they got in the playoff in that matchup. And did they deserve a bye? I don't think so. I do think the seeding should change, where you get in by winning a conference, certainly automatically off a Power 4 conference, maybe not a group of 5. And then you just do the most deserving teams based on what their records show, based on what their resumes show, based on who they beat. If you want to factor in AP ranking because you're clearly not getting rid of it, sure, you can do all of that, and the CFP ranks it themselves. So you just automatically get in by winning the ACC, the Big 12, Big 10, and the SEC. And then if a group of 5 is deserving and they have a resume deserving to get in, like a Boise, sure, but you shouldn't automatically get a bye. I do think Boise should have got in the playoff, but I don't think they should have got a bye. And that
Mhm.
was corrected by Penn State, the team that was better, that had a better resume, that was in a tougher conference, that couldn't win that conference, that was blocked to do so with better teams, and had a ranked win that they did not have during the regular season, etc. They played on the field. Penn State beat them, and that was kind of fixed. But I do think maybe if you had the 8-team playoff before the 12-team playoff, you wouldn't have seen Indiana without a quality win getting in. You wouldn't have seen
Correct.
Boise State if you didn't do the seeding issues and you did my thing, then that would have then left them out. And it might have made it, when you think about it, the seed lines of who got in this year with Notre Dame and Ohio State playing for the national title in their low seed lines because of how the seeds are messed up that I told you about, then maybe we wouldn't have seen those teams. So that's interesting. I don't know if I care to get too many more. I mean, maybe this is an unpopular opinion here. I think 12-team now is good where it is. I don't personally want to go to 14 in a year
Mhm.
or two. I don't want to go to 16 in 3 or 4 years. And I don't want to go, there's already rumbling people say, well, let's just go 24. Let's make it like March Madness in basketball. Basketball, there's a lot more parity. The teams that are in those mid-major conferences can beat anybody in any given day. And I don't just mean an occasional Boise State. I mean a lot of those teams can. There's a specialness to it. There's a lot more teams vying for things. It's 5-on-5. There's a lot less people on the roster, obviously. One injury can change it. One player can change it. Totally different dynamics. You can quickly turn it around, even easier there with the portal than in college football. So I think it's completely different. I don't want to necessarily mimic that. And if you want to mimic the NFL, which is what college football clearly wants to do, then maybe you're okay here. Maybe at 12, maybe you go to 14 like the NFL's doing. I don't need to go it anymore. But it was a special year. It's going to be remembered as an historic year. It's ironic. Ohio State wins the first 4-team playoff. They win the first 12-team playoff. So maybe they're going to wait again until it gets expanded to win it in the future. And I do think the major point that a lot of programs need to hear, while we have seen the NIL era obviously be about money and the teams that are spending are winning big, the blue bloods are not guaranteed anything. The big markets are not guaranteed anything. Some of them certainly are top dogs still, like Ohio State, but
Mhm.
you can budge in there if you have a historically bad football program and you maybe get benefit off a schedule, or you have a great coach, or you get some players in the transfer portal or whatever. You get an influx of money. You can do it. Indiana's that example. So you can quickly turn it around at, say, a West Virginia or Maryland for the programs that we cover. It can happen if things go right, and you still have that now more direct path by winning a conference title to get in, even though probably the bye will go away. I do think that's going to go away, but you at least have that opportunity to get in. So it makes it more defined. And now we're going to go into another era, George. Pete Thamel's even calling the end of the NIL era off this Ohio State title and calling the next era the revenue sharing era. So
Mhm.
we'll see what that is. It doesn't mean that Ohio State and those blue bloods are going to be bad, or those programs that are spending money are going to be bad that have been good. I'm sure Ohio State and Notre Dame could be right there again, but it is going to be a little different, and it might open up the path a little bit more to even more parity. So we will see how that goes. But it was a success. I mean, when you look at the conversation, you look at what happened. I do think, and we talked about this before, maybe a better way to adjust things and not totally go up against the NFL, because you're still never going to beat them in ratings. And we talked about the transfer portal issues in the December window and players being forced to leave and Penn State losing their backup and all of that. You know, maybe you do have still the 2 transfer windows because you need them. I know the coaches voted now to move it from a 30-day window to a 10-day window. I do think that's better. I don't think it's going to happen, though. But I do think you need 2 windows. You need one after spring ball in case a guy misses the cut. The coach no longer likes him. You lose a starting job. Depth is different, etc. So you got to have that opportunity. You probably got to have another one, but maybe you have that first portal window move more to January. You do it before the CFP, but after bowl season, you try to keep those, because I hate them. I'm fine with them getting rid of them. No one cares about them, but they're not going to get rid of them. The ratings for a random bowl game on Tuesday are better than anything else on TV. So they're there. And maybe
Let
you
me
do the
correct
other
myself
one.
too, real quick. 22.1 million, the official number, the most watched non-NFL sporting event in the last year was the national championship.
Yeah, but not NFL. You're never going to beat the
Yeah.
NFL, which no one else would too. And you also have the darlings of Notre Dame and Ohio State, so that's why some people thought maybe there would even be more numbers and more ratings. But who knows? But maybe you make that second window after maybe the January one that I would propose instead of December. Maybe you make it after spring ball, but you move spring ball. There's been options of maybe moving spring ball to where the spring game is more in a May situation, more May and June rather than April. Changes the calendar a little bit, helps academics a little bit. And maybe you start, there's some who've even brought up that maybe you start the season a week or two earlier, and that would allow you to still end around January 7th, 8th, 9th, whatever that date would be, instead of going into the January 20 territory. Because once you get into August, you could just move that up. It would give them less of a vacation in the middle. So after the spring game, you would have less of a break if you're moving the portal window, and maybe only 2 weeks instead of a month. And then you go into it, and you, instead of 3 weeks of fall camp that you don't really need, you do 2 weeks and you move it up 1 week. George, the proposal is very simple. There's a week 0 where Hawaii plays. Everyone just plays that as week 1. Everyone plays week 1 in week 0. There is no more week 0. And then you just 1 week ahead. That's simply put, you could do that. So those are tweaks that can be made, but it was another fantastic college football season with a lot of wackiness to it. We're going to see a lot of that again. And we have Notre Dame and Miami week 1 to kick things off. And I want to make it very clear. I don't want to hear anyone tell me that any of these teams playing those top dogs in week 1. I don't want to hear anyone say they don't schedule anybody, because already we got a couple games.
We're running back Ohio State and Texas. Yeah.
Yeah, we're running that back. But I mean, already we got some teams that are putting themselves on the line that probably shouldn't do so. But what we've now seen from the 12-team playoff, that you can make up for it. So that does make this a lot more interesting, and it makes it more similar to the NFL. So anyone who says Ohio State isn't deserving because they want to do the body of work thing, that's the old school way. We're now in a new school thing. We have a playoff that we never had before. It's not just opinion. Now we have a playoff where we're playing it on the field. And George, it's no different than when the Giants beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. They weren't, body of work wise, they weren't the better team. They didn't have the better resume. They didn't have more quality wins. Nothing was more impressive there. They caught lightning in a bottle in the playoffs off of the rules and the format, and they end up winning, and they beat them, and they get the ring. So that's kind of what happens now in college football. But we will see where certain programs go, what happens next year, what the rev share really looks like, if it does create more parity, if they do change the seed line and all of that. And if they do increase the playoff, which based on money, I'm sure they freaking will, even though I think we're good now for next year and onward and upward. But it's hard to be fully mad. I wouldn't have minded if they ended it a week earlier. You get a little fatigue at January 20th when you're still worrying about college football. But I think if you tweak, maybe make the spring game different, summer different, start season different, I think maybe then you could make that happen. But they want to be the NFL. So they got an NFL model. They got an NFL playoff. They got an NFL type of champion. And we'll see how long Ryan Day lasts now as a national champion.
Will that convince maybe not the most ardent anti-Ryan Day people, but you've got to, and the fan base
they want to be Michigan. I will tell you, there are Ohio State fans.
You and I know.
Even my wife's cousin, her boyfriend is an Ohio State fan. And this is before the championship game, but I saw him on something we call in our family the lasagna party for a lot of December birthdays. They're not Italian. Yeah. I was Italian. It's very ironic that people make lasagna. We celebrate a lot of birthdays. We watched the Army-Navy game. It's fantastic. It's an annual thing. And he literally told me at that point, before Ohio State went on the run, that when he loses to Michigan, he does not even want to win a national title, because he knows that Michigan will talk smack and taint it and ruin it forever. Because when Michigan won, they did have the win over Ohio State. And he does not understand that how you can win a national championship and have problems with a very average team that lost most of the talent from the year before. He doesn't get how they could lose that, because that's a big deal in the rivalry. And he even argued that he feels like Ohio State a little bit under Ryan Day and I'm not saying this is me, this is what he argued. This is the Ohio State craziness of the fans, and he knows he's being irrational, so I'm not throwing him under the bus here, because he said it. This is what they do, that he feels Ryan Day and the program puts more of an emphasis on just getting the playoff, then worry about a national championship. And Michigan is just like any other game. But to the fans, it is the Super Bowl, and they want to win that even more than winning a national championship. Now, for most programs, you would take losing to your rival and winning a natty any day of the week, but that is the irrational Ohio State fan. And it is funny, George, because the only reason why and this Ohio State has
You
themselves to blame for this if this would occur, and it's not going to, because Oregon's not going to claim it. The only reason why we have a debate even that exists, or the Wolf rankings were ever to do that, or why we can even go body of work, is because Ohio State lost to Michigan, George. If Ohio State would have beaten Michigan, even with the earlier Oregon loss, because they beat him in the playoff and then won, that would have been even, and they would have got one unanimously on every ranking that's ever existed. There was a crack open because they lost to, it was a bowl team. It wasn't like, say, 13-9 when Pitt beat West Virginia and they were 5-7. No, Michigan was a bowl team. They were a winning team, but they weren't who they were the year before, and they shouldn't have beat Ohio State. So because they did win it, it opened up that crack for a stupid poll to say somebody else is the champ. And that is a little bit of their own fault. But that's the fan. So I think the situation that you're asking, this is what it is. They won a national championship. They're going to be fine. They're not going to fire him. But, George, I'm telling you right now, if they lose to Michigan next year, the fans will turn on him again. They have to beat Michigan.
All right. I'll leave next year out of it because you're probably right about that. But, like, it's got to have persuaded / assuaged the concerns of some of the anti-Ryan Day people. Because if you get the literal exact scenario, you gave me WVU losing to Pitt in 2007, but West Virginia still gets to play in the national championship, still gets to at least go to the national championship game. I'm all right with it. And
yeah.
Of course,
and
it probably team BCS, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, and it was also different though. I don't even know if they would have made the 12-teamer because that was a real bad loss. Like that really moved them back. I think they finished 7th or something that year, but maybe they would have got in a 12-teamer. But you could argue they would have deserved it less than Ohio State even deserved this year because that was not even to a bowl team. I mean, Pitt wasn't even a bowl team. So it's a similar comparison, but that was a way worse. It was a worse loss though. It was a worse loss.
100%. Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I'll take.
But
take
yeah,
West
it would
Virginia
count the
losing to
same.
Pitt
No, 100%.
Yeah.
No, it would.
Yeah.
I mean, not even just the national championship.
And Ohio's again, arguably, Ohio State had the hardest road of a national champion ever because they had to play 4 playoff games.
In the playoff. Yeah. I mean, once they got in the playoff, yeah. But again, in the old system, and what Ohio State fans are trying to bring up that hate Ryan Day is that if there wasn't the 12-team playoff, he wouldn't even have had a chance at a national championship because they wouldn't even have got in the 4-teamer, and the Michigan game would have been an eliminator. And that is the case in the past system. But this is what we're playing with. This is what everybody agreed to. So you know that when there's 12 teams, you're expanding it. And if you have a 12-team guy that lost to somebody who's not a great team, and that 12-team person, that 12-team guy in Ryan Day and his club is able to turn it on and win in the playoff and get hot, then they can. And they were a low seed, and they're able to turn it on and get hot. I mean, George, if you're Oregon, you're probably sitting there too thinking, man, we got to play Ohio State off the bat. I mean, they're really good. Like them losing to Michigan screwed the whole seeding up separate from the rules because they were not a low seed team. They should have probably, I mean, if they would have beat Michigan, they would have been right up there, and Oregon would have still been ahead with the Big Ten title, but they still would have been very, very high. So that's just the format. That's just what happens in a playoff, that you're going to have these situations. But the Ohio State fan, it's the same thing with Jim. It's a little bit of the same thing with Jim Harbaugh. Now, obviously, he eventually won his national championship too. But the conversation was early on in his tenure, you got to beat Ohio State before you worry about anything else. And he couldn't beat Ohio State. Now, he wasn't a contender like Ryan Day has been every year in and year out. But George, I mean, when you spend $20 million and you can't beat an average Michigan team who lost most of their roster and their quarterbacks in the NFL, the coaches in the NFL, and yet you can beat Oregon clearly, you can beat Notre Dame clearly, that I could get being pissed, but they're not going to fire him. But he would have got fired if they didn't have the 12-team playoff. I think Ohio State's sitting on that with not making a 4-teamer in a regular bowl game they wouldn't have cared about. They would have fired him.
In a 4-team, and
they weren't in. They wouldn't have been in the 4-team.
And might not have got in an 8-team if there was an 8-team.
Yeah, might not have gotten an 18. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that the loss would have, again, remember the trajectory here. Oregon had already clinched a berth in the Big Ten title game. And so it's
the fan
down
pressure,
to,
he would have been fired 100%.
It's down to, at that point, 3 1-loss teams between Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana of who's going to go, and Ohio State was
We
winning in to the
we
Big Ten
should have saw
championship
the
game.
rematch there before the playoff. We
Yes,
should have saw
with
Ohio State and
Oregon.
Oregon there, not Penn State.
If
Right?
if Ohio State wins that game, they're playing Oregon. There may be a 6 or what, but that game would have ended there. Yeah, if they lose the game and lose the game to Michigan, lose the Big Ten title game opportunity, and then in theory lose the opportunity to go to a 4-team playoff, and we were still at 4 or even 8, then yeah, they would there would have been immense pressure to immediately fire him on the field, let alone and then the same
Yeah, I
the
don't
whole
think he
thing
would have
still
been.
plays out the way it did on the field, like
He
with the
wouldn't.
flags and all
Yeah,
that.
they wouldn't have let him back in Columbus. I mean, I honestly don't think so. And that's why, George, there were legitimate national reporters before the CFP got underway, going on shows
Mm.
and saying, here's what I'm hearing from sources about the future of Ryan Day for this job over here, or his candidacy for this job, or where maybe he could be in the NFL. When in reality, he wasn't even fired, but they were already assuming that he was going to get fired because of that Michigan loss. Off of what you're saying, in an old system, the old format, he would have been, and he probably would be elsewhere now. But because of the playoff allowed them to still get in, nobody was thinking that. But you have to let your mind go, no, if they're going to get in, we can't make any decisions on this yet. You let it play out on the field. That's really the end of the season, is after the CFP, not before. Like the NFL playoffs ends after the postseason, not before. And if you go hot and win a title, you can save your job. We've seen it in the pros before. So it's happened here in college football now in the first year of the expanded playoff. But he definitely would have been gone if they didn't have the 12-team playoff. 8's the question mark, but certainly wouldn't get in the 4-team playoff. And again, the whole BS about Oregon having a chance at a claim, if they would have got in the Big Ten title game, George, after beating Michigan and then beat Oregon there, then Oregon wouldn't have a chance at a claim. The reason why all of this exists is because the stupidity of them losing to Michigan. And I think everyone would agree, including themselves, Will Howard, Ryan Day, everyone, that they shouldn't have lost to Michigan. It's the worst loss of the last several years of them losing to Michigan. It's one thing a year ago when Michigan won the national championship, but you shouldn't have been losing to this Michigan team, and they did lose it. It sucks to lose, but it's much better to win your national championship than, and lose to your rival. I'm sure there's even programs that would take winning a conference title and losing to their rival versus beating your rival and then, having a 7-8 win year. You want to max out what the team can accomplish off of, overall, than just worrying about one game, even though people care about rivalry games. So it's an interesting tidbit to this year. It's not going to be the biggest issue in the world because Oregon's not going to ridiculously put it on a press box or something. But Ryan Day, yeah, and it'll be interesting how long he goes. But George, we've also seen coaches who were not well liked at their schools win a championship in the midst of people wanting them fired and then still not be there that long.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a guarantee that he's going to be there forever. I mean, look at
it's not a
Larry
lifetime
Coker at
thing.
Miami, for example. He won a national championship. People started saying he's not really doing it. They don't like his coaching. The players were doing it.
They said Larry Coker did it with
Butch Davis's
players. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, my point is he was out a couple years after we had one of the greatest seasons in college football history. And he had him right there a couple times. He won. He should have won another one off the horrible call against Ohio State. He could have 2 rings, and yet he was out a couple years later. So that's just one example. We've seen that. So it wouldn't shock me if we're sitting here 2 or 3 years from now and Ryan Day is not the head coach of Ohio State. I think he definitely gets through next year, but you can't lose to Michigan. And if he gets one victory over Michigan, I think he makes up for the weirdness of this year. But if they go again, George, next year and don't beat Michigan, even if they get back in the CFP, the fans are going to start saying, why can we not beat Michigan, which maybe is a whole conversation for another show. But I just also think the rivalry games, throw the records out the window. It ends up being a game where you play with more energy. It did matter a lot this year, obviously. Michigan was able to be motivated to what they thought maybe to bump out Ohio State and certainly kick them out for a Big Ten title. And Ohio State went on a long – Ohio State fans also forget. It's like I'll compare this to what I cover and on the basketball side.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting there. So West Virginia's lost the last 2 years in basketball in the backyard brawl. One of them to Josh Allen in an interim year, arguably the worst year in program history. And then this year with Darren DeVries, even though he's in the midst of taking the NCAA tournament in a fantastic year with some big wins. But I was sitting there in the backyard brawl of this season. And Mountaineer fans were just irate. They're talking about the comparing them to Steelers Browns, how, they're never going to, why can they never beat Pitt? Why can they never win this rivalry? It's like the Steelers beating up on the Browns every year. It's so embarrassing. And I had a member of Pitt media who covers Pitt. So he literally covers Pitt, not just in Pittsburgh media, but covers Pitt. Say to me, he would say next to me on press row when we were seeing this from fans, people were yelling this in the stands. There were West Virginia fans, and we're seeing this on social media, comparing it to Steelers Browns, even on both sides. And he was saying, "Does everybody not realize that West Virginia won this rivalry 6 straight years before the Huggins drama?" And I was like, "Sir, I do get that. Everyone should realize that, but the fans are being irrational. They just forgot that it's not Steelers Browns where usually the Steelers win it and they're a way better program. Basketball wise, in the brawl, you could argue West Virginia is a better historic program. They won it year in and year out for 6 damn straight years. They had more tournament appearances, Elite Eight, Sweet 16s, Final Fours, etc. Much better resume the last 60 years, and more legends and Hall of Famers from Jerry West to Huggins. And because a couple years, the fans acted like they never got it done for 30 years. That's kind of Ohio State, Michigan in football right now. Ohio State used to beat up on Michigan. They have a better run the last 30 years. Michigan, before that national championship with Harbaugh, they hadn't won one outright in 50 years. The one in 97 was a situation. Ohio State's had multiple this century, and they won that rivalry year in and year out, even early in Harbaugh. And that was a question on him. And then Ohio State wins it a few years in a row, and now, or Michigan wins it a few years in a row, and Ohio State fans are acting like, they never win it and they haven't won it in 20 plus years. That's just not the case. They're just wrapped up in not winning it now. So Ryan Day could easily win it next year. But I think that's kind of where the fans are a little bit. And yeah, if he doesn't beat Michigan, the fans are going to come back and say that he didn't really earn the title and they would have won it with the roster and the players really won it and all of that. But that's not really fair to him either. It's hard as hell to win a national championship. And the last thing I do want to say, which is just a sports history addition to this. So Marcus Freeman, head coach of Notre Dame, lost the national championship to Ohio State. He also lost 2 national championship games as a player with Ohio State. So he's now been on the losing end 3 times in that actual game, no matter what era you're saying. It was that last final game deemed the national championship game, losing twice with Ohio State and then to Ohio State. And let me tell you, the funny part about that is that I would imagine, George, I'm going to drop the mic on this and we'll move on. If Ryan Day is ever fired based on what we've seen now, and Marcus Freeman being an Ohio State guy that maybe has done everything in the world, he's the young up-and-comer, except for win that ring, maybe Ohio State hires him and tries to pluck him. And does he have the emotional attachment by being a former Buckeye player and maybe knowing he has to maybe go there to actually win the ring, to actually want to go there and join that lineage rather than stay at Notre Dame? Do they get in a war for Marcus Freeman if Ryan Day is ever fired? So that's all in play for the future, but I don't think there's any way to wrap up the 2024-2025 college football season in any other way than it was drama-full, asinine, but also a great one.
Someone else who has reached the championship round but taken some losses is Jimmy Butler, who's done so in Miami.
Yeah.
And doesn't want to even try to do so anymore in Miami.
No, he doesn't want to try anymore. No.
His relationship with the Heat appears to be irreparably damaged to where Pat Riley, who doesn't usually come out and make public statements like this, came out and said, "We're not trading Jimmy Butler." Jimmy basically called his bluff. Now we're in the position that the Heat are listening to people about trades to Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
Then, oh no, it's not true. And then Shams Charania, who was kind of leading the reporting, ESPN's NBA insider, leading on the reporting and being proven right here as the machinery starts to turn to potentially get Jimmy Butler out of Miami. We'll touch on destinations in a minute, but
suspended twice. 7-gamer and then now a 2-gamer.
2-gamer because he didn't want to fly on the team plane or whatever. Missed the flight.
And where did you see wore the Suns colors on the shoes in the game that he did play? Did you see that? He wore that's not a coincidence. I don't know of any Miami Heat sanctioned shoes that are purple. He's needling them. He's calling the bluff, and I think we have a stalemate here, George, between Pat Riley, who has the most bulletproof resume from player to executive to coach to just mafia boss of basketball, basically. He's the most stubborn. He never gets in these dramas. He even told LeBron James when he was there that, hey, it's not your team, it's my freaking team. If you don't like it, go. And then LeBron left, and he didn't care because he's freaking MF and Pat Riley. So there's stubbornness there. But George, I feel like in terms of stubbornness and drama, he has met his match because Jimmy Butler basically says, I respect the resume, but I am the most stubborn MFer in the sport. And I am not going to change position because you throw out a tweet, because you throw out a statement, because you say something on Dan Le Batard's show, which he also sat with him for an hour and talked about how this is different and he's going to handle this and this is what it is and you got to conform. Jimmy Butler's not conforming. We've seen this time and time again through his career. So, yeah, Pat Riley, Jimmy Butler's a borderline Hall of Fame guy. Pat Riley's one of the greatest resumes in the sports history. He's met his match in terms of stubbornness, though. It almost feels like, even though a trade's going to be very, very hard that we'll get into, that Jimmy Butler is not going to back down. And you can suspend him 7 games, 2 games, welcome him back, suspend him for the season. That man has a player option for $50+ million coming into this summer. I don't think he's going to get that elsewhere. So if they can't work out a trade and they keep on suspending him, he could really call their bluff and do the real funny thing, the funniest thing ever, and pick up the option and say, now do a sign-in trade. And if you can't make that work, you're paying me. I mean, the cards are all over the place here, and I think he's pretty stubborn to drag this freaking thing out, which is how we're talking about it here on this show after the second suspension of the 2 recent ones.
And that's kind of the crux of it there that you pointed out, is that Pat Riley historically has not lost these spats. It's been,
doesn't even care if he loses the player either.
Yeah, it's the Braun. Hey, Braun, you can do it this way or not. Braun leaves. Eventually, Dwayne Wade leaves. Ends up going
Shaq.
back home to Shaq. But Shaq, of course, much at the later end of his career and everything.
Yeah, but he said he wanted to stay, and Pat Riley told him that this is going to be your role. You're no longer even maybe going to be the number 2, and Shaq thought he had years left. And after the 06 title, and Shaq, said, I'm Shaquille O'Neal. I want to do this. It's my town. I did a super soaker, and we won a ring with Dwayne Wade. And Pat Riley said, I don't care, man. I don't care. I was doing Showtime Laker when you were, 8.
The only one that gets to stay is UD. Udonis Haslam. That's the only one.
Yeah, he gets to stay. If you're cool with basically just being a vet and dragging it out, then yes, he gets to stay and gets his jersey.
And that's kind of like
they disrespected Dwayne Wade. Wade County, they disrespected. Dwayne Wade talked about this. He felt disrespected on how that was handled. And Pat Riley at the time, they were talking about another deal to let him end his career there. He should have been a Kyle Ripken, Derek Jeter, play his whole career there, and a Kobe Bryant thing. And he went to Chicago, where he was from, obviously, and even had the time in Cleveland. But he said that if they gave him a little bit more of the number, he would have stayed there and ended there and not gone anywhere else. And Pat Riley said, nope, this is what it is. You're not nearly as good anymore. I suck the cow dry. Your legs now and your knees suck. You were a Hall of Famer. We'll retire the jersey and put up a statue that doesn't even look like you, funny enough. But we're done. It's almost a very New England Patriot mentality way that we appreciate what you did, but once you no longer are able to serve us and help us as much, they don't do if you remember, Kobe Bryant got that $30 million contract his last 2 years when he was no longer near what he was. Pat Riley doesn't do that. If you're less, you're getting less. And if you want respected for your legacy, leave. Doesn't care. He doesn't care who you are. He's willing to lose rather than lose a battle with a drama-fueled star. So he
losing his way.
They're a contender now,
but lose under the heat. Yep.
And he feels like, I'll get another one. Or they made finals even when they didn't really have stars around Jimmy Butler. So that's credit to the coaching and Eric Spoelstra having to deal with this. And he's obviously Hall of Fame
losing
coach
the way,
too, but
losing the way of the Heat culture. And add to that with Wade, and I'll touch on that here in a second. They just do the statue thing, this past year to kind of
doesn't look like him, by the way. Have you seen that statue?
Does not look like him.
I would literally want it taken down if I'm Dwayne Wade. It does not look like
very bad.
No, very bad.
In the same vein, Wade goes and partners up with Ryan Smith, who owns the Utah Jazz, and gets into ownership in the NBA as a part-time owner with the Jazz.
Not giving him
as one of
Miami,
these
not giving
guys.
him a cut of the Miami thing. No.
Yeah, one of these guys who wants to get into,
Mickey
being
Harrison, no.
ownership in the league along with LeBron and whatever. Mickey Harrison, of course, owns the Heat. And
Yeah, and then did you hear when Pat Riley said to Dan Lebitard that he has to answer to a boss and his name's Mickey Erickson? Dan Lebitard almost bust out laughing. Like, I get he owns the team, but I mean, are we joking around? He's basically the description I gave is accurate. He's basically a mafia boss in Miami. He's not listening to any. He does not have a. Can you imagine Mickey Harrison firing Pat Riley? He's basically God
no.
there. So he's not. He does not
And
have
so
a
that
boss in all
and
reality.
so that
No.
that kind of goes into, like, to illustrate this whole Heat culture thing. You
Yeah.
go from, Dwayne Wade, who was drafted and developed there, and when LeBron and Chris Bosh get to Miami, Wade is there to kind of give them the lay of the land of how this organization goes. Because when LeBron's in Cleveland, as we all know, it was LeBron's team. And in
Yeah, you're right.
Miami,
Yeah.
and we honor what LeBron did there and the rings and everything like that. You could argue it was still Dwayne Wade's team from a leadership standpoint. Maybe not in the stardom or the scoring or
That's what
whatever,
they've
but
talked about this, that Wade was still the team leader the whole way through, but he even has talked publicly that after the first year, because he was still the number one on the court, he gave it up and said, LeBron, you're a better player. So you're going to be
yes,
the first option, but I'll still do the huddle.
offensively there. But like in terms of like
Right.
captain, if I can throw
Yeah,
a
I mean,
hockey
we
C
no,
on
I get what you're
on
saying.
Dwayne
We
Wade's team,
did see it kind of matriculate to at the last couple years. LeBron was running the huddles, so it got
Sure.
a little cloudy. And then
Yeah,
Dwayne
yeah,
Wade
yeah.
even had said at the end that he wasn't fully aware LeBron was going to bolt out of there until the last minute either. So there was some hurt feelings of LeBron leaving, but Pat Riley,
Yes.
to what we're saying, did not give a damn. Did not give a
No.
damn. I'm sure he wants to win another ring, and they were in the finals every year. But if
And so
LeBron's flirting
Braun,
with another, all that, and there were rumors that LeBron told Pat Riley he wanted to have his Maverick Carter on the plane, and Pat Riley said, "Well, that's not how it's done in the '70s and '80s, and we're still rolling
yeah,
with that Heat
might
way."
have done it like
And
that in Cleveland. Might have done it like that the second go around in Cleveland or in
I
LA.
mean, this is
Not
after
doing it like
4
that in Miami.
finals and 2 rings and
Yep.
MVPs. He told
Yep.
LeBron, "Your boys they can run your company, but they're not on this flight." And
Yeah.
LeBron almost laughed and said, "Well, my God, it's a players' league. I got to get him on the flight." And he said, "Well, Cleveland, the door's open over there, buddy."
Yeah.
And then you get them
And
all on the
so
plane. So he
LeBron,
doesn't care.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
does not
yeah.
care. Does not
No.
care.
And so LeBron leaves, and so
Got to
Wade's
respect
still
that a
there
little
again,
bit, whether it's right or wrong. Got to respect. No, I don't. This is what I'm dug
sticking to your
into.
guns.
Yeah.
And so LeBron leaves, go back to Cleveland. Wade stays there a little bit. You think he's going to end his career there, but to the point you've mentioned, he does not, and Wade has to leave,
Yeah.
leave from Miami before he eventually retires. And so now Jimmy Butler gets there, and it's Jimmy Butler and a bunch of young players. And Jimmy Butler gets there, just before the pandemic. And of course, the Heat go to that final in the pandemic bubble, and then go back to the final, soon after that. But
And Jimmy Butler
Jimmy,
dragged them there.
yeah,
He was the best
yes,
player by far. It was
yeah,
not
oh,
even close
by
to the
far.
LeBron Heat team. Yeah.
But he gets there, and there's no influence on him about Heat culture other than Udonis Haslam, who's who's now retired, but was on that roster for so long, just as like the minister of culture,
Yeah, who was
basically.
the leader? Who was Dwayne Wade on that team? Jimmy
And
Butler was
so
the best
exactly,
player, but he wasn't really,
and so here we
slapping
are,
everybody on the butt saying he'd go get him.
where Jimmy Butler is going to do Jimmy Butler things. And I don't have a problem with Jimmy Butler. I don't want to make him out to be like a villain or a pariah or something like that here.
Well,
But we have a history of Jimmy Butler doing this throughout his career. So it's
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, no,
unsurprising.
this is just typical Jimmy Butler stuff. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Heat got 2 finals runs out of it. Yeah, it's kind of weird for him to do it so early because this started. We're now near the midpoint of the season, but this has been kind of in
I
the
mean, they're
works
in the
for a couple
playoff
months
race.
now. So yeah, yeah, but it's just like, okay, he just feels the external circumstances of just his, because you heard him say it. He loves Miami.
Yeah,
He's
he's happy here
part owner
off
of
the
a
court.
he's a
Right.
part owner of a coffee shop in Miami. He loves the
Hey.
lifestyle of Miami.
Hell,
I'm
everyone loves
paraphrasing.
Miami. Sure.
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing what he said in the press conference, where love living here, love the culture, love the city, love the people. Just can't play basketball here. Just can't.
You want to. Yeah.
Maybe
you
he can stay in
the
Miami.
quote was, "Lost my joy." Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Lost his joy. Maybe he can live in Miami and take the Bright Line train to Orlando, commute to Orlando, play for the Magic. But so it's like there's not this like kind of one side, it's you're running up against Riley and his old tradition, and probably some people who are saying, you know, thing that we have, and you've got other people. If you're not on the side of tradition, you're on the side of player empowerment. And Jimmy Butler's really done nothing wrong here. It's just kind of like this is kind of how he exits, and it's just going to happen at some point. And Pat Riley is going to be the one with egg on his face because he tried to strong arm him and it didn't work.
Well, here's the situation. The crux of this issue, which is the crux of a lot of issues in pro sports, but even in the NBA during player empowerment, is money. Why we got here, and everyone's been reporting this too, it's not a secret. Jimmy Butler, well, it's twofold. But number one, when Jimmy Butler was hurt at the end of last season, if you remember, kind of was under the radar because everyone was celebrating the Celtics. But Pat Riley publicly told Jimmy Butler to shut the F up because he was talking smack to the other teams, including the Celtics. If you remember, he threw a tweet up there, if I was on the court, we would have beat you again. And that type of paraphrasing, he threw that tweet up. And to his credit, George, what you just mentioned, when he was on the court, even though he didn't have as many stars around him, he was beating these teams. So he was hurt. He felt like if he was there, it would have been different. And obviously that wasn't the case. They lost, and then the Celtics went on and won a championship. But Pat Riley said, if you're not on the court, you don't get to talk, because that's an old school mentality that it doesn't matter how great you are or who you are. He would have said the same damn thing to LeBron or Dwayne Wade. If you're not on this court playing, even if it's a legit injury, you don't get to talk. And we've definitely heard Jimmy Butler, George, knowing how stubborn he is and how hard-headed he is, he doesn't like anybody, including Pat Riley, doesn't matter how great the resume is, publicly disrespecting him and telling him, hey, I'm your boss, you shut up. That's not a Jimmy Butler thing that he loved. And the bigger issue, right after that, Pat Riley told him no for an extension. This man's 36. He's not 26. When he's done this with Minnesota, when he's done this with Philadelphia was about money too. He wanted a bigger deal than before they were ready to give it to him off of a little brief period when he was playing well, and I think he would have really fit there long term. He wants the cash, and I get it. It's pro sports. You're going to want that cash. But at 36 years old, his value is not nearly what it was. He's not a $50 million player, really. He's averaging 17 points per game this year, which is his lowest average in a decade. He's not nearly what he was. There were conversations about making Tyler Hero the number one option on this team, and he's kind of morphed into that. Jimmy Butler is not who he was. You could argue borderline Hall of Fame for dragging teams that didn't have enough around him, for his overall play, even though the all-star appearances aren't really as plentiful as you'd like. I think it's a borderline case. But you could argue putting him there, it's easy in basketball. It's easier than other sports to get in. He'll probably get in someday. But when you're 36, the value is not what it was when you were 26, even when you were 32. So Pat Riley, because of what we talked about, Pat Riley did not do what was done for other stars in other destinations. He told Jimmy Butler, hey, man, I appreciate these two finals. We're hanging a banner even though we didn't win the ring. We wouldn't have got there without you. You're a great player. If you ever make the Hall of Fame, we'll retire your number, but we're not going to pay you for what you did in the past. A lot of players in sports get paid for what they did in the past. Pat Riley doesn't pay for the past. He wants to pay for the future, and the future is not as bright as the past, so he didn't want to give him that big money. And there's a player option, all of that. But Jimmy Butler did not want to have this lame duck season. He wanted his big money. He wanted the Paul George thing where he kind of said, nope, if you're not going to give me an extension here, I'm going to go elsewhere. And he did get his 100+, but he's younger too. And Jimmy Butler just didn't get his money and got disrespected by Pat Riley. And then once those two things occurred, George, in the offseason, we were bound to get here. Once those two things occurred, we were bound to get here. And while they're a contender, while they're a playoff team, while they could make another run, because this is a wide open Eastern Conference with the Celtics looking vulnerable after winning it all, Milwaukee looking vulnerable, the Knicks dealing with injuries left and right, there's an opening here to maybe go on another run like they've done with those two finals. But Jimmy Butler would rather have a chance at his money elsewhere. We'll get into that destination with Phoenix here in a moment, because that looks like it's almost impossible to make happen, and that's the team he wants to play for, and who knows where else maybe he could fit. But because the teams that are being talked about, the Golden State's, Phoenix, they're worse off than Miami right now in terms of the standings. It's not about the standings. He can say whatever he wants about a ring. It's not about that. It's about being disrespected, and it's about the money. And as much as you like Miami, the location, he lost his joy on the court. So that's how we got here. I do think he's stubborn. But the only thing I will say, George, as much as you're saying Pat Riley has egg on his face and is forced into this, while we're in a player empowerment league, and we saw this with James Harden. He literally called the GM a liar and said, if you didn't hear me, I'm going to say it again. And he's a liar at a Nike
He
event
hates Daryl Morey.
overseas.
Hates him.
Hates the man. And by the way, they used to be very close friends. Hates the man. And George, what happened there? Everyone said, well, if you disrespect a GM, the league's going to collude against you. You're never going to make it happen. He got his way. He got right where he wanted to be and got his money eventually with LA now. But what I will say, caution, as we've always seen players get their way in the NBA the last decade plus, very rarely are they dealing with Pat Riley. I'm sure if James Harden called Pat Riley a liar, Pat Riley sent him to Siberia, not to Los Angeles. Pat Riley is a stubborn guy too. I mean, that's been brought up by Brian Windhurst and others, that this man is not forced to send him anywhere. He could say, here's a trade. You want to go anywhere, you're waived for any. Okay. You're on, now you're on, you mentioned Orlando. They're an up-and-coming team, but that's not where he really wants to be. You're in Memphis. They're, John Morant, they're good. That's not where you want to be. Maybe worse. Maybe you're, with the Wizards, for example, and you're just, an afterthought and having no chance. And don't put it past Pat Riley. And Jimmy Butler doesn't have any no trade or anything. He can't force his way somewhere in that respect and say no. If he's traded, he'd have to go. Because what I do think the Heat are going to do, and which is why we're still here with suspensions and why there hasn't been a trade already, you're saying they're forced into it. I imagine if I had to bet, they're probably going to trade Jimmy Butler. He'll probably get his way, and maybe he'll even get his way and go to Phoenix somehow, which makes no sense right now. But Pat Riley, unlike other GMs we've seen, George, would you not agree? Pat Riley is not going to do a trade that does not benefit him in some way. We usually do see the teams cave and just get screwed on deals and the player gets their way. This man is not, and here's how I'll go into it. He is not going to take on Bradley Beal's money and his no trade clause.
Do we do straight up one for one, disgruntled guy for disgruntled guy, Bradley Beal and Jimmy?
No, it's not even. I'd rather take Jimmy Butler all day of the week, even with the player option, because Bradley Beal has the freaking no trade clause. I don't know how him and LeBron have it, because obviously LeBron makes sense, but for Bradley Beal to be the other guy in the NBA with a no trade clause is freaking ludicrous. He carried that with him over to Phoenix from the Washington situation. He thought he was part of a big three there that never fit, and while they're on a little bit of a stride now that I actually wrote about recently, they're still barely in the play-in tournament, and he's clearly the third option at best. He probably is best to come off the bench. He's now missed a couple games, but he's mostly a bench player. He's not who he was before. He's not able to get the shots he got with Washington. He's diminishing a little bit on a good team. And separate, he has the no movement clause that would come with him, even if he waives it to go elsewhere. And that is a non-starter for me. So I guess that's what I'll ask you here. While we agree it's a player league, while we know it's money, while we get Jimmy's situation, and while he's probably going to get his way somehow, if you also agree that Pat Riley is not going to take a deal that is bad, and he's not going to take this Bradley Beal no movement clause when he's a worse player, and Bradley Beal doesn't even want to waive. He's said through his agent, I have all the cards. I might not waive it. They haven't talked to me. All of that. I ask you, how do we ever resolve this? Because while you're saying Pat Riley has egg on his face, George, I don't think Pat Riley thinks so. I think he's saying, I am not going to accept the Phoenix Bradley Beal deal if he has to bring that no trade clause with him, or if he's bringing his money with him, or if he's a worse player. They're not going to screw themselves for year in and year out for the future to make Jimmy Butler happy like every other GM does when they're dealing with stars. I don't think Pat Riley will do it. I think he is the most stubborn guy to ever deal with this, and there is a stalemate here, which is how we're in a second suspension.
So I feel like we're going to get the classic NBA 3 to 4 team deal. If I do the Brian Windhorst fingers, Phoenix just acquired a bunch of draft picks from Utah.
They did
in the past week. What's going on in Utah? What's going on in Phoenix? So I mean,
what's going on in Utah? But there, so if we're doing a 3 or 4 team deal, do you agree that Pat Riley is not taking Bradley Beal on? He's not going to end up with Bradley Beal.
I'll say yes, because
that's a bad contract, man. That's a bad contract. Why would you want to take that?
And I'll say yes because of the relatively recent past precedent. If we remember the Damian Lillard negotiations, where
Yeah.
Lillard was in the running to go to Miami too, and Miami wasn't. I can't remember specifically, but Miami wasn't willing to budge on a couple of certain things, and he ends up
Right,
going
right,
to
right. They will
Milwaukee
not
in kind of a
budge.
shock, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. It was all Miami all day. Even Damian Lillard has still said that Miami was his first option. He wanted
yeah,
Miami.
and the Blazers were just like nah, and
And
like
that's
here you
part
go
of if I'm
Milwaukee
you know, we didn't say this too.
wins a
That's
title
part
of
of the only
Milwaukee, right? So
well, maybe, and it might be a better fit for him. But the only thing that I think Jimmy Butler's handled this very immaturely, which is what happens in the NBA, wearing the shoes and all of that. I would be annoyed too if I was the Heat and Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley. But the only thing that I will defend Jimmy Butler on, George, he took him to 2 finals, didn't get Damian Lillard, didn't get any damn star to come down there in freaking South Beach, which is easy to recruit stars. There's money and there's cachet there. So he could certainly go to the management and go to Pat Riley and say, I get I'm not who I was before and you don't want to pay me for the past. You didn't help me enough
yeah,
when I was in my prime. They
they kind
didn't
of
do
just
enough
held
for him.
they held pat with what they thought was going to work after that bubble run, which was
They fell in love
Dunk,
with that run, right?
Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo. Bam, you can leave him or take him. He's kind of developed into a better big man, but
Yeah.
Hero had a down year. Whatever, they eventually traded or got rid of Duncan Robinson. So it's yeah, they stuck
Hero's
pat
having
with
a great year
that.
now, but
Hero's
yeah,
having a great year now. Didn't that season following the
yeah.
bubble? So yeah, but they could have used just one other wing piece,
They didn't help him enough.
to help him out there. Butler says he won't. Yeah, Butler says he won't go to Memphis. We know that much. Um, other than that, it seems like anything else is open. Maybe a Toronto or a Detroit. Um,
So I
team
want to
that's kind
clarify
of
this. So do you think Butler, I'll ask it this way. If so we both agree that Miami is not going to end up with Bradley Beal because that contract sucks. Is that the case?
correct, but he still may get to Phoenix somehow.
No, that's what I'm
I still
asking.
think
That's what the question was going to be. So if we agree that Pat Riley, unlike past GMs, is refusing to take on Bradley Beal, now just play this hypothetical that Bradley Beal is willing to waive the no trade clause, because that's
okay.
even a thing that if he's not willing to waive it, you can't even do this, by the way. But if we agree he's willing to waive it and Miami's not going to get him because that deal would be bad for them, do you still think Jimmy Butler gets to Phoenix?
Jimmy Butler still gets to Phoenix, and if I had to guess without knowing the specifics of people and their caps,
Yeah.
that somehow Bradley Beal is jettisoned to a third team somewhere as part of the thing. So Miami gets some picks, somebody else gets some picks, and Bradley Beal combination of whatever. I don't know who a
Yeah.
third team could be in that scenario, and then Jimmy Butler does end up in because that or something to the effect where he does end up in Miami, but indirectly, a la Chris Paul for the 6 days he was a Wizard before he ended up in Golden State. Something along those lines, where maybe Jimmy Butler does end up there with the understanding that 2 days later another trade is coming to flip him to another team. Granted, that was an
Yeah.
off-season deal, so maybe it's a little bit different when you do it mid-season. But no, I think Beal is a part of the trade, but he will end up at a third team for help. Phoenix seems hell bent on Matt Ishbia, who's the relatively new
I
owner
mean, they
out there.
clearly want Butler, and they're basically
They
trying to tell
they want
Bradley
Butler,
Beal
and
get the hell
Bradley
out.
Beal is
Right.
a bit of a malcontent, though not as much of a malcontent as Butler is. And personally, I could have told you that back in the Wizard days. Like Bradley Beal, I'm like Bradley Beal's prime was gone after John Wall left, and everybody wanted his services, including Miami. And now here we are, and he's
Well,
been
it's
nothing.
easier when you
So
take all the shots with Washington. It's much harder to fit into a system that he was trying to do
correct.
now on a good team. But here's the other end of this, because this is now what I do to try to push George in a corner where there's really no answer here. This is the question. No. This
I
is the
gave you the
question.
answer. I get the 3 or 4 team deal that gets everybody.
No.
Everybody gets what they want.
Yeah. Everyone gets what they want, unless one man in the world says they can't. Because as much as Pat Riley's resume is mafia boss of basketball, and as much as Jimmy Butler's done a lot in this league, despite continuously being a little bit of a malcontent and a drama problem, Bradley Beal, who we agree is the third man in terms of resume, he's not near the other two. He has all the cards, as he
He,
said through his agent, George. So
he
my
does.
question to you is, We just talked about the scenarios of 3-4 team deals, which are getting reported and in rumors, and we agree that Pat Riley is not going to get screwed on the deal, on the Bradley Beal deal, and he won't take the no movement clause. So you have to work out all these things. They'll probably get picks. Maybe there'll be a first round exit this year, but Pat Riley doesn't give a damn. He'll be done with Butler. Butler will get his way probably because that's the NBA. But what happens in the hypothetical scenario that is very realistic? If Bradley Beal goes to you and says, I get I'm not who I was. I get Kevin Durant and Booker would rather have Butler. I get you would rather have Butler. I will not waive my no movement clause. I will not hurt my career and go elsewhere just to help you. I will not do it because even the Chris Paul example, he didn't have a no movement. That's why he's always traded. What would you do if you're Phoenix? And what do you then do with Butler if you're Miami? If Beal sticks to his guns and says, I am not waiving it. And that is why we're still here. That is what's being reported. It is not just Mike Asti trying to bring it up on this show. What do you then do? And what do you think is the resolution if Beal refuses to waive that no movement clause? He can do that right now. And then this is off.
I think there's still an onus there somehow for Phoenix to.
They got to have him in the deal. They have to have him in the deal.
Well, that's my
no. The money wise, that's already been said. He has to be in the deal. They cannot do the deal without him in the deal. What I guess I'm looking at you it would be then if Bradley Beal says he's not waiving it, they cannot get Butler, and Miami would have to look for another trade partner. But they would not be able to get. They cannot. He has to be in the deal. It's not even just about they like Durant or Booker more. The exact money works out with Bradley Beal, and he doesn't have the long term of Booker. He doesn't have the youth of Booker, and then Kevin Durant actually George is going to have his deal up in a year, I believe. Yeah. So they don't want to put him in because that's going to be working a new
lot
thing.
Of money.
Beal has to be the player in this deal. That's already been said. So if he says no deal, I don't think I think they're out of it then.
Then as it can Miami retain salary, but then it's probably still not enough. So
if you're Miami, you need another team to get Jimmy Butler.
Another
then
team or two, basically,
And then Butler can't go to Phoenix. And if you're Phoenix, I mean, I guess also the other part of that is, could you give me let's play role play here. If I'm Bradley Beal and I say to you, George, you're Matt Ispia, I get you think you're the cool new owner. Your first day on the job, you brought in Kevin Durant. I have all-star appearances, but you may think they were at Washington when they were irrelevant and overrated. Sure. I have a no movement clause. You didn't give it to me, but it exists. And I'm going to be stubborn here, and I'm not waiving it because all these examples of what you're giving me, you're not even getting me into Miami because of my contract and Pat Riley doesn't want me. You're going to get me on a bad team. I'm not doing that at the end of my career, just being tapered off everywhere. I have a no movement clause, and I got one, and I'm going to use it here, and I'm not waiving it. What then would you say if you're Matt Isby? Would you try to convince him? Like, what's your response there? Or does just Bradley Beal take the dub?
I would try to convince him because
how would you convince this man?
Because he's not happy. It's not like Bradley Beal's like, I'm having a great time here playing with KD and Book, and we're going to.
When did he say he's unhappy and wants out?
He just this is me watching videos of him and watching games of him where he just seems like a malcontent at this point.
Because he's on the bench. He doesn't want to be on the bench.
Yeah. And so, listen, you just want to sit here and blah, 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 or do you want to actually go somewhere and play? I think that at some point, if he does care to actually play and be a starter again somewhere, he's going to have to be a starter somewhere else because it doesn't seem
like. But you think that's possible? So you can get him. Like, would you work with him on a team that actually in this 3 or 4 team deal? Do you think there's a team that's not Miami that can get him to play?
I think there are teams in this league where he could earn starting playing minutes that aren't Phoenix. Yeah, I mean, there's somebody in this league's got to be able.
I just want you to live in this scenario because you thought it was pretty easily wrapped up there with your 3-4 team scenario.
Oh, he's got to waive the clause like that. That's
what I'm saying. What if he doesn't waive the clause?
I know.
That's a gigantic linchpin.
He's got to want to play somewhere. So. If he's not, he's got to want to be able to play and get starting time somewhere else.
I think it depends where. It got to be a better situation. There's no guarantee it's a better situation.
Phoenix don't seem like they're good of a situation for him, so that's why I think you got to convince him.
I mean, it's not a good situation because he's a bench player who's now basically being a healthy scratch. But, I guess the issue also, George, is He just waived his no movement clause to get to Phoenix, which is where he wanted to go, right?
Yes.
Does it not devalue the freaking no movement clause that you have in your contract and fought for if you're waiving it twice in 2 years? He would have to waive it again. Like that, I mean, if you're his agent, would you not tell him, I don't think you should waive this a second time?
I mean, is not I don't know off. No, I think he's got a young son. I don't know. Is moving is just the upheaval of Chris Paul's been traded to half the teams in the league. He don't seem to care. Is just the
He has
process
his
of
family doesn't go with him though. His family does not go with him. His
yeah.
family's in LA still.
Does he just does Bradley
Beal's
Beal just
31, by the way.
want the
31.
stability of 31 years old? Does he just want the stability of I don't want to have to make a move and find another house again after I lived since Washington drafted him in, if my memory serves me correctly, 2011.
I think he also thinks they can fix the, you're saying it's bad basketball, and I totally agree, but I think he might think they can fix that, and that Miami, for example, with the bad contract would not be better basketball. Jimmy Butler just said there's no joy there. Why the hell would I want to experience no joy on a team that's not really any better in terms of a title contender? And even if he goes elsewhere because the Heat don't want to take the contract and there's 3 or 4 teams, they're likely going to be teams looking for picks that aren't good. So I don't know if, yes, the situation for him now isn't fantastic, and he entered the league in 2012 as a first rounder. I don't think there's a guarantee that Matt Ishbia, George Gerbo here can get me to a better situation. Like if you screw me and get me to a worse situation in your deal that you have to present it to me and his agent. It's not like you can try to pull the wool over their eyes. You have to say, here is the trade. And then he says, I will waive the clause. You can't try to do this secretively. That's another problem. So he's going to see the trade. And if you're sending him, I don't know, send him back to Washington and let him just hit a lot of shots. Like, it depends on where you're sending him that would take him. And I do honestly think it's one of the worst contracts in pro sports, to be honest with you, because of the no movement clause.
He's got and he's got 110 million some left on it or owed on it. So
if there wasn't the no movement clause, I could get behind doing anything. But that clause sucks. He's not good enough of a player to have that no movement clause. That's insane. You give that to LeBron James, who doesn't want to move out of LA, who's won titles, and he's a GOAT candidate. You don't give that to Bradley freaking Beal. And if you would tell a casual fan, give me 2 players that have no movement clause, there's only 2 of them in the league, I'm sure everybody and their brother would say LeBron, and they probably would say Steph Curry. Maybe Steph Curry doesn't have one. Mm-mm. He could be traded tomorrow. They wouldn't do it, but he could. We've seen players like Blake Griffin. He signed a new deal for an extension with LA a decade ago, and they traded him a month later. That can happen to players without a no movement clause. Bradley Beal having this no movement clause is just wild. It's just wild to me.
I mean,
and it's really making this impossible.
Basically, if you're Bradley Beal, if I'm Bradley Beal, like you want me to be here, I'm
Bradley Beal. I said you're Ishbia.
Oh, I'm Ishbia. Okay.
That's what I was saying. I was Bradley Beal, and I was telling you that I won't waive this no movement clause to get in a worse situation. How can you convince me to get the hell out of there?
Basically, Bradley, your options are do you want to stay here and collect the check and not play meaningful basketball, which more power to you because it's something I'd do, or do you want to actually play basketball in a meaningful role, in a more prominent role, and play the game that you presumably love, or do you just want to be here and collect the check? Because that's option.
So then, Matt Ishbia, I got to ask you a question. Then
I don't have a good argument.
Matt Ishbia, I got to ask a question. You brought me here a year earlier, saying publicly that I was the missing piece. I was a former All-Star at the time. Kevin Durant and Booker were all excited to have me, even though now they're clearly dropping their comments that they want Jimmy Butler. Are you telling me that in a year's time, there's no way to fix this situation here, and if I don't waive this clause, you're not playing me, I'm just collecting a check, you can't get me back, even if I'm a bench player, and I agree to come off the bench, you basically have decided to hate me in a 6-month period. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, it's irreparable. You're sad ever since you left Washington.
What did I do to cause this, Matt Ishbia, outside of not being Jimmy Butler?
I don't know. I don't have any answers.
Yeah, I just think that's the funny part about this is that we've seen in the past, obviously the player gets what they want, even if they're wrong, and then, we move on. If Bradley Beal does not want to let everybody move on, I guess I'll ask this as we fully round it out here in all seriousness. If Bradley Beal, hypothetically, to stay here, says, I am not I am not going to exercise my no trade. I will not waive it. I'm going to exercise my no trade clause. If Bradley Beal says I will not waive my no movement clause, regardless of whether you think it's stupid or not, and he says I'm not waiving it, do you still think Jimmy Butler is traded, even if not to Phoenix? And then do you have a team that comes into play? Because Miami then would not be able to work with Phoenix, but they still would want the hell away from Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, no, Miami seems like the kind of franchise that isn't going to let. I mean, if you say by the trade deadline, I guess I'll say yes because in
I'll just give
theory,
you in general. It doesn't have to be
in
by the deadline.
general,
I know that's coming up.
yeah, in theory, can you just continue? I don't know what the limits are, maybe in the CBA about suspensions, conduct detrimental to team, as you've said. We're up to is 7+2, so he's been
I
9
mean,
games,
in the
right?
offseason, after the season, he could pick up the damn option himself because he's not going to get more money elsewhere and then force a sign and trade. But if he picks up the option, you're on with him next year again, unless you work out a trade again.
Yeah. So Miami doesn't seem like
You can't
the
dump him.
team that's going to let this fester. Um, so I would err on the side of he's because it's not just like, oh, he's he wants a trade and that's it. No, we've been in this vocal publicly, be honest to God, being more honest about. Normally we hear about this stuff behind the scenes, like when the whole Lillard
Yeah.
thing was going on, like Dame was kind of put on a good face for everything. He was so loyal
Well,
to
he loved the Blazers. Right.
Portland and everything like
Yeah.
that. And it's just kind of like, okay, we're hearing blah, blah, blah rumbles. No, doggone Jimmy Butler come out there and said it like, I have no joy. So it's just going to lead to, we're at a irrevocable point here. And I think that Miami won't stay the Heat and
Do you have
Riley
another
and
team
Ariston.
then? If Beal says I'm not going, and then Phoenix is out, because Phoenix, I'm going to answer that for you. Phoenix is out if Beal says no, I'm not
Oh,
going.
100%. Yeah.
So then
I
who?
mean, so
Where
who does
else?
that leave us with? I heard Dallas is a rumor. That's kind of interesting
Golden State's
because
been brought up, but they're
Golden
not that much of a
State,
contender. They need another
they're not that much of a
player.
contender, and like I don't think injecting Golden State has done a good enough job with. They've got this kind of young group of guys,
But
Kaminga
they
and
want to
some
win
other
now with
guys.
Curry, though. They want to
I
win now.
know, but they're in the honest to God, they're like in a half transition phase. Like we
They are.
understand that.
They are. Yeah.
That's why Dallas is kind of interesting because the
Yeah. They have
pieces are
pressure to win
kind of
now.
there. Like Luka's been injured a little bit, but
No, they just in the
Kyrie and
finals.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that seems like a team that should be better, and it just hasn't been this season. So if I put Butler in there, that can maybe supercharge a second half run for them. So I like if I'm going to pick another team, and all these teams are mentioned are Western teams. It's
Well, they're
Dallas.
teams that he also, through his people, have let leak that he would be
Yeah.
willing to go to.
No Memphis,
Obviously,
as we
Phoenix
know.
is the preferred destination, but Dallas was brought up. I don't know exactly how the money works there, but you're no matter what, even if it's not the Beal scenario, you're likely needing a 3 or 4 team deal because it's going to be impossible to just do this straight up when you have so much money moving around. That's why you see a lot of 3 or 4 team deals in the NBA. But it's just funny to me because yes, Butler is likely going to be moved. If he's not, I think it'll be hilarious because then it'll be kind of like the Ben Simmons thing, and we drag this into the summer. Because then he could easily pick up the option. Pat Riley's not going to put up with any BS. He's not going to take on a bad deal. He's not going to take on Bradley Beal just to help out the NBA and get rid of this drama or to help out Butler and give him his way. Pat Riley is not going to do that. But there is a possibility that Bradley Beal does not acquiesce, for a word we like here on the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show. And if he does not, Phoenix is just screwed. I mean, they cannot force him and they cannot trade him if he does not waive that.
Phoenix
So
still has Phoenix's problem is harder to solve than Miami's problem.
even if Phoenix, I'll say this too. Even if Phoenix gets Jimmy Butler and Bradley Beal waives the no movement clause, as much as we're down on Bradley Beal, I do think Jimmy Butler is a better fit because he's a better defensive player. He wouldn't try to take as many shots. I get all that. They still aren't winning a title. And if you even flirt with the idea of Jimmy Butler coming off the bench, he's going to want the hell out of there. You better be starting him. This is a guy that just wants out of a team he took to the finals twice.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be playing this man. And obviously Booker is the face of your franchise and Kevin Durant's a Hall of Famer. So you're looking at 3 of them in the starting lineup again, which is what Phoenix has kind of not wanted to do, which is why they're moving Beal to the bench. They kind of trying to spread out the love. He's not, there is no way I can fathom in my mind Butler's cool with coming off the bench. So you're in the lineup now. I don't necessarily think the Suns are that much better. I mean, we'll see what they do in this tougher stretch coming up. They're barely a 10 seed as is. Yeah, Butler make them interesting. but I don't think they're going to go ahead and make a run. Even if they get to an 8 seed, they're in bad positioning now. The months are dwindling down on the NBA calendar. And part of me hopes Bradley Beal says no and won't waive that no trade clause. That would really give us some NBA drama. That would just be fantastic.
Yeah, you want it to
I
keep
would like to
stretching.
see
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I would like to see him dig in, and I honestly think that's a possibility from what's getting out there with his agent. But
Let's round it out here a little bit with some off-season baseball. We like when baseball comes up in a non-traditional baseball time, and it's one of our favorite baseball conversations. Of course, it's the
yeah,
Baseball
always
Hall of
around this
Fame.
time. Yeah.
We're great patrons of the Baseball Hall of Fame, one-time visitors of the Baseball Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
and another class, a really good class this year. Um, 3 players elected as part of the writers' ballot, and that
Mm-hmm.
includes Houston Astros closer Billy Wagner, Yankees, Indians, Brewers pitcher CC Sabathia, and legendary longtime Seattle Mariner, played for a whole bunch of teams, Ichiro Suzuki, who fell 1 vote shy of
Yeah.
unanimity, would have became only the second player ever to do so behind Mariano Rivera.
Mm-hmm.
He joins Derek Jeter in that in infamous but unique club where
The
only
99
was able
percenters is
the
Jeter,
99.
him,
That's
and
good.
Griffey, by the way, got 99 as well. He had 3 people that didn't vote for him. So the 99 percenters are Jeter, Ichiro, and Griffey, and then Rivera, the only 100%. Yeah.
That's a good 394 ballots submitted. 393 of them had.
Yeah.
Near unanimity, near perfection, 393 of 394. And it's funny, we get the trend, and as you like to point out, and as we've done before, Babe Ruth didn't get 100%, Hank Aaron didn't get 100%. For
Yeah,
whatever
the whole
reason,
thing's
people are,
ridiculous. Right.
the whole
Yeah.
thing's ridiculous. It's softened as we've gone historically, because I got to the point where, all right, and after we went some years ago and saw Griffey get in, and Griffey got every vote except 3, then at some point it's like, all right, somebody's just going to vote for shits and giggles for the purpose of making that nobody gets in unanimous. And then I was kind of shocked that it was Mariano Rivera, honestly, who was the one that got all the votes, over 400 that year, that voted for Rivera, and to be the first guy. But say la vie, here we are, and obviously doesn't diminish anything from Ichiro, but you could argue he's one of the greatest players, one of the greatest Hall of Famers ever, just because of
Oh, yeah.
the circumstances surrounding. He's the first Japanese player to go in the Hall. He comes from Japan late in his
Yeah, late.
mid of his
Yeah.
age 27 of his baseball career, and comes over
Right.
here and still plays into his 40s, and still puts up 3,000 plus hits and hitting average, and breaking all of those hit records, which are very kind of OG to the game, when the
If
game
he
wasn't
came in at
about.
19, he'd shatter everything and never would be broken 100%.
Yeah, when the game could have had 5,000 hits if he played since
That's what I mean.
his
Yeah.
adolescence. If you combine it
Although the
with
way we work now is you could argue whether they should count those hits in Japan as major
the
league hits
Japan
and give
hits,
it to
yeah,
him. And that's a whole nother debate. But yeah,
sure.
he with his late age, doing it right away as an MVP and a rookie of the year, the most 200 hit seasons, without a doubter, 100%.
And just a spectacular career, and just the consistency by which he did it. Could hit home, a guy that could crush home runs. If you watch videos of him, which are
Yeah.
fun, where he just like takes batting practice and hits home runs, he could have been, for his admittedly slight build, could have been a home run hitter. But his mechanics were so good in just making contact with the ball in a way that was so successful, that
We
that's what he
messed up
stuck
not getting
to.
him in a home run derby, though.
Yes.
We
Oh yeah,
messed
that
up
would have
not
been
because
fun.
even that we should have given him a home run derby just for the fun of it. I think that would have been
Just for
cool.
fun. I
Yeah,
mean, we
he
put
100%.
Jason
He
Bay in
could
it
have hit
once,
it.
and he didn't hit any home runs. We could have stuck
Right.
Ichiro in it.
Right.
So, a truly remarkable career. Excited to see him go in, and what should be a fun class.
You still with me? Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I got you. Sorry, the Wi-Fi dropped out on me on a second there. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're still good.
Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
And Ichiro goes in with CC, with Billy Wagner, Dave Parker of the Pirates veteran committee
Yeah.
vote. A nice, good, notable name class for us guys that that like people that we've seen play in our lifetime and can remember. CC pretty dominant, 80+% of the vote, 85 or 86% of the vote.
Yeah. First ballot.
Um,
Yeah.
and was kind of illuminating that in listening to him talk to Harold Reynolds on the post show analysis on MLB Network, that Harold was kind of a guy who had talked to CC in the year before he retired with the Yankees and was like, hey,
You told him to hang on to get the benchmark numbers.
if
Yeah.
you get to 3,000 strikeouts, you finish
Right.
with 3,091 strikeouts. If you get 250 wins,
Yeah. He finished with
these are
252, just
and
barely got
finished
over.
just
Right.
over the mark. Like
Yeah.
you get to those numbers, and it looks
Right.
prettier, and it's going to look better on a resume than like 240 or whatever.
Yeah. It's
And that kind
unfair,
of
but that's the truth of it. Yeah.
that's the truth. Yeah, it's unfair. It's the truth of the matter. Yeah, that he just racks it up in his last season, and CC kind of got him to that mentality, and um, essentially pushed him over the ledge to get him back on in the game in his final season. So it was really nice to see that moment and everything. So yeah, and add in Billy Wagner, and that's kind of where we get the maybe unique crux of the argument here, where so 10th year on the ballot, final year on the ballot. If I'm doing eye test, I'm like, I don't think he's a Hall of Fame closer, but I don't disagree with putting him in the Hall of Fame. And so you get to this point where he added vote totals his entire time. There's other guys that have better numbers. I'm not, and I think he finishes 24 votes over the threshold. I'm not mad about it, but like in my mind, he's not necessarily like I was more upset last year with Joe Mauer. I think Joe Mauer got in by 4 votes. Like Joe Mauer, to me, all due respect, I don't believe him to be a Hall of Fame player. Billy Wagner, like, okay, if you told me Billy Wagner Hall of Famer, yeah, but not a guy that I would have voted for in the Hall of Fame.
I mean, before I fully unpack the current candidates, I have to say I think Joe Mauer. That Joe Mauer's a little underrated. Then I think if Joe Mauer played for the Yankees, you would think he's a Hall of Famer. Joe Mauer. I mean, you're talking about batting titles and MVPs. This man individually has the accolades and has the resumes.
I'm more of a smaller. Is Joe Mauer one of the greatest catchers of all time?
He's top 10, 100%. I mean, top 10. It's not like it's a deep list. Johnny Bench, Padre Rodriguez, Mike Piazza. You can't name me, 9
Yogi.
catchers. Yeah, that's only 4. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, there's got to be
There's others, but I mean, I think he absolutely is top
all right,
10.
That's fair enough. I thought you'd be more anti Joe Mauer. I apologize.
I mean, I don't think Joe Mauer. I mean, we can argue all day about first ballot or second ballot, which I think is kind of a dumb thing that baseball still does and worries about. But Joe Mauer, he finished with a career batting average of 306. I mean, he's won an MVP. I think if he didn't have the MVP, you could argue what you're arguing, but he had the MVP. He's, batting championships. Minnesota's success is pretty much all because of him in that era. And he was the face. There's worse Hall of Famers. Barry Larkin, is he more of a Hall of Famer than Joe Mauer? Okay. I mean, Barry Larkin did win a World Series and has an MVP, but they're very, very similar at different positions. So I think Joe Mauer is legit to be there. And I think CC Sabathia deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I could argue maybe not the first ballot, to be honest. I'm not making this an easy thing to get into. I think Joe Mauer is a little underrated if you have to really look at analytics for him. But CC Sabathia did bump himself up with those benchmark numbers. I would say, George, I mean, was there ever a given year where CC Sabathia was head and shoulders better than everybody else? You could argue that Milwaukee postseason. George, his best season, Felix Hernandez won the Cy Young Award. Felix Hernandez was 13-12 on a Mariners team that did not make the postseason because he never got there. and they gave him the Cy Young. That was the first tip of the cap that, hey, wins are a little bit overrated and we're going to analytics. And Felix Hernandez isn't getting any love from the baseball writers. And I could argue, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. I think he's Hall of Very Good, but I could argue he should get a little bit more love. So he did beat him out 1 year. And I think CeCe Sabathia definitely deserves to eventually get in. He was a playoff workhorse. He does have the 3,000 strikeouts and all of that. I mean, he has the benchmark numbers. He did it over a long period of time. Wasn't just with the Yankees. He was a great pitcher with Cleveland as well. I do think he deserves to get there. If he wasn't the first ballot guy, though, I wouldn't have been mad. And I think by hitting those benchmark numbers, he got there. I think by being a Yankee and having so much Yankee love helped him get there. I mean, George, it's not like the votes are fair everywhere. The New York Post has 13 voters.
Mm-hmm.
Does the paper in Kansas City have 13 people? No. So you're not a lot of New York voters. They're going to bring the Yankee guys in. Technically, Ichiro's won too, but he didn't need the help. But CC, yeah, he's a Hall of Famer for sure. He's wearing the Yankee cap, which I'm sure gets in the crowd of the Cleveland fans because there was a whole conversation before whether he would wear the no logo, but that's not a thing. He's now publicly saying he's a Bronx guy. And he should, but he's a Hall of Famer for sure. But I wouldn't have been necessarily hating the first ballot thing. On to Ichiro, obviously the headliner, obviously one of the greatest hitters of all time. When you say greatest pure hitter of all time, if we're not going to home runs, we're not going to power, we're just going to pure hitter, you're obviously talking about Pete Rose, Ty Cobb, Tris Speaker for somebody who wants to go 100 years back and get to a really history type of name. And then you're bringing up Ichiro, and you could argue where they all fall. But George, even though Pete Rose has more overall hits and obviously, did it over a longer period of time in terms of hits in Major League Baseball, and he did play multiple positions and he won more. And, you could argue Pete Rose being even higher than him in an all-time rank, even though obviously he's not in the Hall of Fame for different reasons. But Ichiro is the one with all those 200 hit seasons. He's the one who clumped them all together, even despite coming into Major League Baseball in his mid to late 20s. He's the one that was an MVP right away. He's the one who was the Rookie of the Year right away with one of the best seasons in baseball history. And then he was consistent all the way through, 300-plus average all the way until that end with the Marlins. And he is one of the greatest hitters, one of the best players of all time. Baseball's not a sport like football or the NBA that counts the rings. He doesn't have one, didn't play in a World Series. That does suck for us as fans to not see him on that stage, but it's not his fault. And he was consistent all the way through and was just one of the greatest players of all time and was obviously going to be a slam dunk first ballot Hall of Famer. It is stupid. He didn't get unanimous, but I'm a little different than some other baseball history buffs here, or even baseball fans that are just all mad that he didn't get 100%, because I'm going to tell you, as you talked about, I get it's stupid. I think it's dumb. If you have an Ichiro resume, this is not debating CC for first ballot. This is not debating Willie Wagner if he deserves to be there. There's not a person alive that thinks Ichiro's not a Hall of Famer and didn't watch him the whole way through, whether you knew the numbers or not, and didn't know you're watching a Hall of Famer. And it's the Baseball Hall of Fame, too. This is not just MLB, so you can even go to Japan. Clearly a Hall of Famer. But baseball doesn't do the unanimous thing. Rivera got unanimous. Griffey actually set a record with 99+% and 3 guys not voting for him. That was a record that was a long time there for Tom Seaver. Is Tom Seaver the greatest pitcher of all time? No. Griffey's a surefire legend and first ballot guy, but he's not the greatest player of all time either with the injuries. And yet he got 99+% and broke the record. And Babe Ruth, who, could be on everyone's Mount Rushmore and argue for the GOAT, what he did as a pitcher and hitter and his legend of the game and all the numbers, didn't get 100% of the vote, George. Griffey got, a higher percentage than Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth obviously has a better overall resume. Hank Aaron, George, he didn't get 100% of the vote. Okay. Joe DiMaggio, his percentage isn't even that good, let alone didn't get 100% of the vote. It's not like he even put up a big impressive number out there. Ted Williams didn't get 100% of the vote. Nolan Ryan didn't get 100% of the vote. They don't do 100%. And it's not because these guys aren't legends. They all deserve. Ty Cobb, forget off the field and what you believe there. He didn't get 100% of the vote at the time. You knew he was going to get in. They didn't. It's just Johnny Bench. We probably agree he's the greatest catcher of all time. Didn't get 100% of the vote. He's the greatest at his position of all time, a former multiple-time champ, a former MVP, has everything you'd want, led a dynasty. He was the face. He was the leader, did not get 100% of the vote. People didn't vote for the man. Now, there are reasons people do bring up, and this is what the guy they actually brought up. There was one of the three people that didn't vote for Griffey outed himself at the time and said the reason why he didn't do it is because what I'm saying. He knew Griffey was so popular, he would have got in anyway, and he wanted to be able to vote for other people because he didn't think Griffey needed his vote. That is an argument now, but here's what I'm going to come back, George. During that time, okay, because that's a whole steroid debate that we're not going to get into here. Bonds and Clemens, they're off the ballot, even though A-Rod's still there. Okay, if you want to save your vote and be able, because you only can vote for 10 guys, and maybe that would fix things if you could open it up. But if you want to say, I'm not going to vote for Griffey because he doesn't need my vote, and Bonds maybe does need it because of the controversy and he's not getting in, and he didn't get in on the ballot, obviously, in all those years, I can hear that. But George, here in 2024, 2025, the voting was in 2024 and now in 2025, Bonds is off the ballot. Clemens is off the ballot. A-Rod's there, but they already said they're going to make him wait, and then we'll see at the end. It'll be the same type of deal. Who are you saving it for? They're off the ballot. You can argue you want Bonds in. He's not on the ballot. You have to wait for this veterans thing that maybe we'll worry about in a year or two. He has to wait for that cycle. It's a 3-year thing after you're off the ballot. It's not even up for this year. He's not there. You can't do it. It's not possible. So who are you saving votes for? So if you're not going to vote for Ichiro because you want to save votes, he doesn't need your vote. I actually think Carlos Beltran, by the way, I think he's a Hall of Famer. If you look at him defensively, offensively, one of the best centers of the era, certainly like post Griffey, he was one of the better center fielders. I do think Beltran's a Hall of Famer for me, and he's likely going to get in. He's likely getting there. If you're going to put in the Mauers, the Larkins, the Matt Wagners, I do think Carlos Beltran's a Hall of Famer, 100%. And I could argue, who's more deserving between those as I did, but I think Beltran's a Hall of Famer. But outside of him, there was really nobody else that was going to really argue to get in. Everyone else has either controversy. People don't want to vote for Schilling. People don't want to vote for A-Rod just yet. The other guys have dropped off the ballot. Who the hell are you saving your vote for? People were you didn't vote for Vitro because you just wanted to be a dick, I guess. I don't know. Or you didn't want him to get 100%. But he obviously deserved it. But it doesn't matter. I don't think anyone needs to cry about it. But it's absolutely asinine. It's absolutely ludicrous. There's no, is it more asinine that Babe Ruth didn't get 100% of the vote, or that 7 people didn't vote for Babe Ruth than for one person to not vote for Ichiro? More people didn't vote for Babe Ruth. Can you imagine at that time, George? I want to put your mind there. We weren't alive, obviously. You're getting back to that ballot. So we're going back to, the 30s and that first ballot. Can you imagine being a voter and not voting for Babe Ruth? I mean, he was LeBron times 10 of that era. He was the star of stars plus the numbers. The man has 90 plus wins as a pitcher in addition to the 700 plus home runs as a hitter, and he did win rings, 7 of them. There was no blemish, and he was a star of stars. He was that name. There's still the Baby Ruth bar. Like, he is still that guy. He's still the Michael Jordan of the sport this many years later. Can you imagine not voting for him then? But that's what happened. People didn't vote for him then, and that's not social media. There's no Twitter or X. There's no people with hot takes and Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless. They didn't exist then, but they didn't vote for him. They're just preserving the 100% thing. I don't know, but I can't imagine it. And the only thing I will also add on the Billy Wagner case, I do think he's a borderline guy. I don't necessarily have a problem with him getting in, mostly for this reason. I don't like ever having a situation where you're only going to have 2 people from one position in anything. So they've kind of had their dug in for a while. They didn't want to have closers in the Hall of Fame at all. That was baseball's thing. The writers for a long time, they didn't want to have closers in at all. And then Trevor Hoffman retires, George, and has 600 plus freaking saves, a lot of them even on bad teams. And the writers had to sit there and say, because he was even before Rivera, okay, we got to vote you in, even though we didn't want to do the closer thing. Once you vote Hoffman in, it opened up the door. And then obviously Rivera was going to get in with all his numbers and his success.
And for a long time, Lee Smith, who Hoffman, passed at some point, who was the all-time saves leader. Lee Smith,
and that's not a legendary name.
No,
Right.
and he didn't get in the Hall for a long time. So yeah, the Hall was like looked down upon closers or the
It did look
position.
down upon closers, 100%. And then same thing it did with designated hitter before that eventually opened up with Edgar, obviously. But it eventually opened up with Hoffman because he didn't just get least missed record. He just, I mean, we're talking about 400 saves for Billy Wagner, for example, 400 some. Hoffman light years above. So they
Yes.
couldn't avoid it. And then I think he's 601 or something like that off the top of my head. And then Marin Rivera obviously is a Hall of Famer. Best, does he deserve 100% to be that first guy? That's a whole different debate that's almost irrelevant. But he obviously was a Hall of Famer and had to get in. And then if you're going to open up beyond them, then Billy Wagner in his career is certainly somebody that absolutely can get brought up. Ironically enough, he was on the Astros, but before they kind of were able to make a World Series run and get good. He had some time with the Braves, but before they were able to, he was right before these teams got good, but he was consistent. His fastball was deadly, and he got save after save after save, year after year after year. And he kind of was overshadowed a little bit in his era with even having John Smoltz, who got in as a pitcher closer kind of hybrid because he had
Hybrid.
200 in both categories. He was more of a hybrid, but he was kind of overshadowed during the spurt that Smoltz was a closer. Even Eric Gagne. George, I mean, in the best years of Billy Wagner's career, Eric Gagne was a better closer.
Man, yeah. Yeah.
He was a better closer in the early 2000s. Those matches with Bonds were Eric Gagne in Bonds. They were not Billy Wagner in Bonds. And Eric Gagne's, because of injuries, you're not seeing him in Cooperstown. You're not going to see him there. So that's the thing against Billy Wagner. And what I will say that I think is an ultimate trump card here, and again, I'm not mad necessarily at Billy Wagner because he waited a long damn time. And I do think 400 plus saves, if you're talking about individual category and being elite at a category, at a position, whether it be DH or closer or whatever, whether they like it or not, it does make sense to enshrine you. It is a museum. You are the best at an individual thing. Okay. But Billy Wagner got in the Hall of Fame. Okay. And a guy like Francisco Rodriguez, if you remember K-Rod, is getting barely 10% of the vote. So to be exact, George, Billy Wagner got elected to the Hall of Fame at 82.5% of the vote, right? He needs 75%. He got 82.5%. Francisco Rodriguez, K-Rod, got 10.2. Okay. Similar era. They're doing it in the similar time frame. One American League more so, one National League more so.
Yeah.
Obviously, that was back when the Astros were National League, but similar thing. Looking at their resumes here, I got it in front of me. So Billy Wagner has the slight edge in wins above replacement for the analytic people at 27.7, K-Rod at 24.2. And I'm one of them. I look at that category. It's a fair thing. So it's used now. It got Maurer in, by the way. Maurer was well over 50. That's another thing, George, for your argument. Mauer's at like 55 WAR. That's very, very high. So that's also why he got in right away. But 27 to 24, okay. So K-Rod pitched more games at 948 to 853. More innings pitched. Win-loss record. Billy Wagner 47 and 40. K-Rod 52 and 53, but they're mostly closers, so that's not totally fair to go to. And I do think wins is overrated. So moving on down. Saves. Who do you think had more saves without looking it up?
Between Billy Wagner and
K-Rod.
I'll take K-Rod.
Yeah, 437. Billy Wagner,
Okay.
422. ERA. Billy Wagner's ERA is really, really good. This is also part of why he got in the Hall of Fame, George. His ERA is ridiculous. It's 2.31. That's very, very good, even in comparison of closers, even looking at Wagner, even looking at Rivera in a way. That's very, very good. K-Rod's at 2.86, but it's not like it's bad. It's not 3 plus. It's 2.86, 2.31. ERA plus does favor Wagner at 187 to 148, so it's a little closer there. Wagner has an edge in strikeouts, does have an edge in K percentage, does have an edge in walking less batters, which is how you win that category. Wagner gets in. K-Rod does have a World Series championship, was a kingpin and the main closer in that World Series run for the 2002 Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. They were still the Anaheim Angels at that time. Billy Wagner never even got near that, really. All-star appearances, Wagner 7 to 6, so it's very, very close. And George, the individual category for the best relief pitcher in a season. K-Rod has 2. Billy Wagner only has 1. He was only awarded the best individual relief pitcher in a season as a Hall of Famer 1 time. That would be the equivalent of a gold glove. It's not really an MVP. That's more of like a gold glove. So Hall of Famers usually stack those. He has 1. K-Rod has 2. I'm not saying I think K-Rod's a Hall of Famer. I do think he's more of a Hall of Very Good, and the analytics do favor Wagner if you got to pick between the two. But is it not a little ludicrous that one's getting 82%, the other one's getting 10? That's pretty damn far. That's a big-ass disparity
Yeah.
between resumes that are very, very similar. And people could bring up that K-Rod has the domestic violence in his past, and there is a character's clause, etc. But there's people with worse things that are in that Hall of Fame now, and that's a big disparity. So that's one thing to bring up if you're a Billy Wagner guy that maybe you don't think he should be in. K-Rod's barely getting percent of the vote. He's barely getting any votes, and the resumes are very, very, very similar. But I think Beltran's a guy that I want to see in the next class. And looking at the first ballot guys coming up, there's not
There's
going to
the
be any
key.
first ballot guys. No first
Yeah.
ballot guys coming up. So Beltran's going to get in.
Yeah, you're looking at, was it Cole Hamels and Ryan Braun were like the two leading candidates on the 26th ballot. So that
Neil
gives you an
Walker's on that damn thing. Neil Walker's on it. Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, no, there's not going to be any first ballot. I think Ryan Braun's there,
which gives an opportunity for Carlos Beltran and Andrew Jones to. I think Andrew Jones will be in his 10th year, his final year of eligibility next year. So.
I think he still might not, but I think Beltran will get in.
Yeah,
I think Andrew Jones is still going to maybe not get in. I mean, his
career
numbers were
252,
going there,
I
but
think,
then
hitter. Yeah,
his average is bad. But not only that, he has 400 some home runs. He didn't hit the benchmarks. Like his last few years just were god awful when he went to the Dodgers, and that really ruined his trajectory. I as a defensive center fielder in the 90s, he was the best in the National League. Griffey was the best in the American League. If they were in the same, now this is the debate for Andrew Jones, George. Obviously, Griffey's a much better overall player. You could argue Andrew Jones a little bit better defensively. Part of what Griffey's lore is all the Gold Gloves, the second most Gold Gloves, etc. He would have had the most if he didn't get hurt. You could argue, what if they were both in the National League? Who gets it for center field? Maybe Andrew Jones gets them all, and Griffey doesn't have any Gold Gloves. Every time Griffey does an interview, all the Gold Gloves behind him. He was in the American League all 10, and Andrew Jones was in the National League all 10. They never were in the same league vying for the Gold Glove. So if Griffey's there in the National League with the Reds at that time in the 90s, not later, if he doesn't get Gold Gloves, he's still a Hall of Famer with the offensive numbers, but that helps Andrew Jones' case too. Andrew Jones was an absolute beast defensively, and he was a great hitter and a power hitter, but his average is bad as an overall hitter. He struck out way too damn much, and he was just so bad at the end. I don't think I'm going to throw a chair if he doesn't get in. I do think he's more of a Hall of Very Good guy, but there are a lot of people that love him and think he should get in. But you watch the 90s and watch those Braves teams and watch that 96 World Series right away. He's in the moments. He has the moments the Hall of Fame loves. So I wouldn't be mad if he gets in either. I mean, he is that interesting case. I think Beltran gets in next year. But George, we've seen the Hall of Fame do this before. I wouldn't be shocked if it's just Beltran. They're not going to give 14 people in just to be nice.
No.
I think Beltran's the guy that's going to get in, that deserves to be in, that will get there, that I think people are making him wait, but he will get there. I think Andrew Jones is a borderline guy, and maybe he'll get in, but I don't see anybody else really. I'm going to make one last time. I'm going to say this, and people, this is a really unpopular opinion, and especially if you're saying wins is an overrated stat, which I agree, because it's not a pitcher's fault if he doesn't win, and especially if you're awarding CC Sabathia a first ballot. CC Sabathia gets first ballot, and Curt Schilling's not a Hall of Famer.
I saw that argument. Yeah.
Is that fair? Curt Schilling was a beast on a curse-breaking team. He was a beast on an Arizona Diamondbacks team.
And back to your hybrid thing.
He was
your John Smoltz hybrid argument. Yeah.
I mean, John Smoltz is in the Hall of Fame.
And that's that weird. I don't like that.
He was a Cy Young contender even on those Phillies teams in the early 90s.
I'm not against.
He only had 216 wins, but his analytic and his ERA and all those numbers are basically the same as CC Sabathia all the way through. He was so important to the moments. I do believe this. If he was not such a far-right political mouthpiece, he would be in. Because they love the moments. They love what he was attached to the Red Sox and Diamondbacks and those special teams. He just keeps saying the thing that pisses them off, and they don't, you know what they don't want? He's going to go on the stage and say far right things, and they don't want it. They just don't want it. But I think you cannot go CC first ballot and say he's not in at all. And that's where we are. And that is ludicrous. If you look at the percentage.
I can understand the people.
There's no steroid suspension either.
Yeah, I can understand the people who do not vote the steroid guys in. I would not be one of those people, but I can understand that
Yeah,
because
it's
that
just
happened within the construct of the game, the actual playing of the game. I
right, and
assume
you could
people are
argue it's a
using.
punishment to them because there's even
Yeah,
some that like I
yeah,
do. I will, and Will Graves has told me this because I don't know if you saw his ballot. He's a friend of mine in the Pittsburgh
mhm,
area with the AP. He is not mad at the steroid guys, but if you saw his ballot, he didn't vote for A-Rod. Will Graves' mentality is that even if he thinks you would have been a Hall of Famer anyway, and this is a fair mentality, if he believes you have the resume like a Bonds, Clemens, or A-Rod, and Bonds is obviously taken away from him off the ballot. He did vote for him in the last year, but didn't vote for him all the way through.
yeah,
He thinks there should be a punishment that embarrasses you nationally, basically, and he makes them wait. He's the last year of eligibility, he's willing to vote for
sure.
A-Rod like he did Bonds, but he will
Very
not do
traditional.
before.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
well, the more traditional is not voting for them at all. That's
Oh,
softening a little bit, but it's
sure.
more at the end. They're making them wait. And if you saw the percentage spike, Bonds went from 20% to 50 to getting close, but then he didn't get in. I think A-Rod's going to do the same damn thing. He'll probably fall shy. I think these guys are eventually going to get in on the Veterans Committee, but they're going to make them wait. They're going to embarrass them. They're
Sure.
not going to let them have the
But
longest speech, all
sure.
that. But this is
But
different. This is different with
yeah,
Schilling.
yeah. So I think
And
people are
Will's not voting
using
for Schilling either.
and I think people are using the Hall guidelines, the open ended character clause against Schilling and maybe some other folks.
That is what
No,
they're using, 100%. Yeah.
yeah, I don't get it with that. Like again, he played. Yeah, he's a dick off the field. Whatever, it doesn't have any effect of what he did on the field. Tykov, virulent racist in the Hall of Fame. Like Shoeless Joe Jackson, etc. Like
Well, Shoeless
everybody
Joe's
decides
not
Pete
in. I
Rose has
could
committed
argue
the
he should
ultimate
be
sin,
in.
and I think someday that'll be rectified by the Veterans Committee. Honestly, now that he's dead, so
You think Schilling
yeah.
will be rectified, or who are you saying will be
Rose,
rectified?
I think at some
Oh,
point,
Rose. Yeah, yeah. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I
I
think at
mean,
some
maybe
point,
Rose will be rectified, but George and I'll link anyone an article they want. I already wrote about this. Again, you bring up Shoeless Joe. If you're putting in P. Rose, and I would put him in, P. Rose is one of the greatest players of all time. The resume is bulletproof. He did everything under the sun and played every position under the sun. P. Rose is a Hall of Famer, should already be in, and should get it rectified. But Shoeless Joe should also be in.
yeah,
I'm a little nervous we're going to be rectifying P. Rose and screwing over Shoeless Joe. Shoeless Joe, you could say he threw a World Series. His career was cut short. He only was able to play basically a decade where Pete Rose played 20 plus. They cut it off in the middle because of the damn
hmm
scandal. He didn't get to fully put that body of work together, but his average and everything was just fantastic all the way through. Was one of the best hitters of that era. And George, he hit in the World Series he supposedly threw. He hit. It's not like he did, not like he sucked or was tanking it. His average was good. He hit. He put up numbers. I'm going to get that actually exactly because I know that.
hmm
Yeah, he. I believe it was 300 some in that World Series that he hit that he was supposedly throwing. Yeah, let me
yeah.
go to so the 1919 World Series that he supposedly was throwing. He hit 375. He threw a World Series and hit 375.
He
I
did
know he
so
signed a
so well.
document. George, by the way, he was illiterate. I repeat myself.
hmm
So the argument of that he signed a document. Can you sign a document and your sound mind is being illiterate? How can you sign a document as an illiterate person? I think he really got bamboozled. Separate from the signing, which he's illiterate, so I don't know how that works. But he might have agreed to throw something. If I paid somebody to throw something and they hit 375, I'm damn pissed because that's not throwing anything. He hit
hmm
370, he hit 375. You can't throw it and do that. So I do hope those things are rectified. I do. And I would even, Bonds, they would put it on their plaque if they were suspected or suspended or whatever is part of the story. I don't think Bonds would have the single season or all-time record without steroids, but he still, I do think deserves to be there. But Schilling's a whole different ball of freaking wax.
Yeah.
And Schilling's career, I do think deserves it as well. But
Him
I
and
don't think it's
Randy
ever going to happen.
Johnson.
I think
Yeah.
there's a higher likelihood that Bonds gets in
That's
than
good
Schilling.
dessert.
And
Yeah.
if you want, I'm gonna say this as we just we'll give NFL picks and wrap up the show here.
hmm
So Schilling's wins above replacement because we're in an analytical age now is at 79.5. The wins are down. His ERA is 3.46. We know about the postseason success and all the glory there. He actually does have 22 saves, as you mentioned,
hmm
being a hybrid, which is insane. And he has a 79.5 wins above replacement. Okay, the strikeouts are there, all of that. I'm going to just go to CC Sabathia for fun. First ballot Hall of Famer. George, not that it's higher or lower, but what do you think CC Sabathia's wins above replacement is?
You told me Schilling's is what?
So Schilling's wins above replacement is 79.5. Not a Hall of Famer.
I would put Sabathia like maybe 60.
62.3.
All right, look at that. All right.
And
Yeah.
he's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't make any. I mean, that's if you want to be
Yeah.
analytic, how does that make sense?
Was
So,
CC was the dominant pitcher, played in, and obviously I don't need to defend him because he's in, but no, the point
no,
about
I think
Schilling
he deserves
stands,
to
but
be in. I'm just saying how
yeah,
insane the voting. I don't think Billy Wagner is worse
yeah.
than K-Rod either. But the resumes are
The
similar.
number
And the voting was way
the
different.
round numbers that I talked about helped him because I do think he would have got in maybe like third year because he was a dominant pitcher who pitched in an era that was still a big hitting era, came up in that big hitting era with Cleveland and those
Sure.
Indians teams, and then gets his World Series ring in '09 with the Yankees. But uh, just beast dominant pitcher on the mound, formidable presence type of guy, but also had other great pitchers, surrounding him in that era that eventually go into the Hall
Yeah,
with
but
him,
but
like,
here, but
Verlander and
but
etc.
here's what I'm going to say because yeah, he got first ballot because of the benchmark. Otherwise, he probably would have still got in with the Yankee thing, but it might have been a couple years in. Hypothetically, say he retired in 2017, didn't listen to Harold Reynolds, didn't get the benchmarks. Say he got in the third or fourth year. Okay, that's still unfair to Schilling because Schilling is not
Oh
getting
yeah,
in
'cause
beyond
Schilling's
that.
not in. Period. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Schilling's not even getting close to the vote
Mm,
beyond 3+ years on the ballot.
agree, agree.
That's and I mean, if you want to make a public statement,
Schilling fell off. Correct. He didn't even make it to 10. He did he get under the 5% and fall off? Do it. You can correct me on that.
I
Uh,
mean, I believe so. Yeah, he
yeah.
wasn't even a top. I believe he actually
If
fell off.
you
Yeah,
if you get less than 5% of the vote in any
right.
given year, you fall off the ballot. It used to be 10, I think, but they changed the threshold. And players used to be in the up until the late 2000s, the late aughts. The threshold was 15%, and you could, or sorry, you got 15 years on the ballot, not just 10, but that was changed as well. So 10 years you get to stay on the ballot as long as you're getting above 5% a year, basically. And I think Schilling
Although
might
there
have
were
got
some years where Schilling was getting in the 40%, so I don't think I don't.
okay. He didn't fall off. He just went to we
And actually,
believe
it
that he
just
went to
quick.
10.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he did have a 58% year in 2022. So
Okay.
no, he was
Okay.
getting more
So he went
percentage.
the full 10 years. Yeah.
Right. He just eventually dropped off because of the time frame, which is what I'm saying. That the 3-year thing and making CC wait without the benchmarks, that'd be fine. But you're
Yeah.
making Schilling wait way longer. No, he was he was. I thought it was more 30, but he did a 58% year, so he was getting percentage votes. He
Yeah.
was getting in there.
And
He
put you
wasn't now.
within 25-ish, give or take how many people put in their votes a year, put you within 25 to 30 votes of the 75% threshold. So
Yeah, and I mean the people that were getting way low percentage. I mean that's a whole nother thing for another day. But I mean even the people that are softening on the Stayward guys, like Sammy Sosa couldn't get a vote to save his life. But if you're
mhm,
looking at just resume, he has 360 home run seasons. Bonds only has 150 home run year. Now you
mhm,
could argue Stayward's helped him more than Bonds, but if you're okay with one, I'm more of a guy that I'm okay with putting them in. I would put on the plaque that they were suspected, they suspended, whatever. If they don't like it, too damn bad. The Hall of Fame runs the plaque. If they don't run the plaque, they can say I don't want in if they want to. We've seen that. The Hall of Fame tells you what hat you're going to be wearing. If they don't like the hat you choose, so this is a dictatorship up in there. So I would put it on the plaque to fully tell the story. They're absolutely one of the greatest players. You put them in, but I wouldn't just have that be Bonds, Clemens, and A-Rod. I would open it up to the Palmeiros, the Sosas of the world. I think McGuire is actually a bizarre case because he didn't even have 2,000 hits. But
mhm.
I definitely think
We are big haul people. Yeah. as they
Well,
call
it's
it.
not so much big haul people, but it's just based on if you're putting in Andre Dawson and Barry Larkin, then you're setting the standard. If you want
Mhm.
to do it where it's only the top 50 players of all time, and you're making it where like Griffey's like the worst of the bunch, and that's how elite the damn class is, then I'm all about it. That's just not what they've been doing. That's just not what they've been doing. But to have Schilling be first ballot and have Schilling drop off the damn thing after a decade, that's about politics. That's
Mhm.
about politics. That's not about the resume on the field. And you can go
Yeah.
to a character's clause, but the wins above replacement, which the same people are, who are citing one over the other, that you love war. The Schilling's war is ridiculous. So I don't, yeah, I don't see how 79 versus 62, and we're having a guy drop off, the other guy goes in first ballot. That's just a bit much there. Um, but we will see, because I think it's going to be small classes here coming in the next couple of years. I do think Carlos Beltran is going to get in again based on the standard of who they put in. I do think he deserves to be there, but I don't think everybody like him deserves. Like, I'm not a Jim Edmonds guy. I think Jim Edmonds is a
Mhm.
whole very good player, but I definitely think he deserves to be there. But CC to me is not a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think CC Sabathia deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. But George, I
I'd
mean,
agree with you. I would agree with you.
I
Yeah.
mean, there were people that didn't want Roy Halladay to get in the first ballot after he passed away, and this man, was stacking Cy Young contentions, multiple Cy Young awards, was a contender, and all got a couple votes away from having three of them. He did win two. He didn't win a ring, but C. Sabathia never was nearly the elite pitcher that Roy Halladay was, and you're making him first ballot as well, and kind of saying they're in the same class. Like, that just is a little bit ridiculous. But that's kind of what it is when you're your first ballot. But Ichiro is going to be the headliner, and this might honestly be also the you might have the record breaking crowd. We talk about crowds. First Japanese Hall of Famer, Ichiro's popularity all over the world. A Yankee going in. I could see Wagner play with a lot of teams. I could see this breaking some records for crowds. If you want to break records for crowds,
Mm.
I could see that. Unless people don't, get on an airplane. But Ichiro's
With
popularity is ridiculous.
the fervency of which the Japanese people love Ichiro, and Mariner fans for that matter.
Assuming they're going to go, yeah. I'm assuming they're going to get on and go to Cooperstown. It's hard to get there,
Yeah,
as we
the
know.
the first
Certainly
the first
from Vegas.
Japanese, and it was interesting to see the breakdown that it's crazy when you think about baseball, a global game now, but in the Hall of Fame, vast overwhelming majority American players. There's 7 Cubans. There's, I believe, 4 Puerto Ricans, 2 Canadians, a couple of Panamanians, only 1 Venezuelan, and now
Right.
one and 1 Japanese player. And I think it'll be an incredible milestone and monumental day for the people of Japan, and they'll show up and show out for him, who kind of didn't lead the way, but came in that wave of guys, the Japanese wave of guys after Hideo Nomo, Kaz Sasaki, his one-time teammate who was the closer in Seattle, another Japanese player, kind of paving the way for Japanese players to make their mark in Major League Baseball. Hideki Matsui, et cetera, and then Ichiro comes and carves his own niche in the history of the game,
And just
and
and
does
just
it
listen,
spectacularly.
just listen to Matsui too. I mean, another '09er on that Yankee team, but Ichiro he was basically like their Michael Jordan and was their Babe Ruth and was their god. I mean, he looked up to Ichiro. So even peers had Ichiro and just such cachet. And just looking ahead a little bit here, I do think next year might be Beltran with definitely no first ballot guy. Andrew Jones, by the way, drops off the ballot, I believe, in 2027 if he doesn't get more votes. So I think he has another couple years. Final year on the ballot is for Manny Ramirez. If you want to talk a steroid guy, is 2026. But Buster Posey is 2027. Career not very, very long. Bringing up the whole Joe Mauer debate. I think if you're, I think Joe Mauer deserves to be in. I think he's an analytical top 10 catcher of all time. But you'd have to argue then Buster Posey probably deserves to be in as well. Very similar, but has more of the rings. And by the way, George, we're going to see how that's handled, because Joe Mauer's wins above replacement is way better than Buster Posey's. So I think Buster Posey deserves to be there, but if he's first ballot, then then you cannot argue against Mauer anymore, just meaning you and the people in the world, because Mauer's wins above replacement is way better. And then 2028 is going to be a St. Louis Cardinals fest, George.
Pujols here.
Pujols and
Yeah.
Molina are both going to go in first ballot, guarantee it. And that's another all-time catcher. Obviously, he's going to go in first ballot, the Cardinal thing. You could argue Mauer ahead of him if you want to look at analytics, but Molina's going to get in, and then Pujols is going to walk in there. And then that's another thing to look at. Will Albert Pujols get 100% of the vote? That'll be another conversation. Will 2027 is the final year for Andrew Jones, by the way. So he has a couple years. So I think Andrew Jones might get in. I don't think it's next year, though. Maybe he'll be the 2027 guy. But will Albert Pujols get 100% of the vote? That'll be the next guy that clearly deserves 100%.
Yes.
We'll see what happens. But as we fully close up shop here, because we don't have tons of time, what Super Bowl rematch do you have? Do you have the recent Super Bowl rematch of Jalen Hurts and the Eagles trying to finally beat the Chiefs and avoid a three-peat for the Chiefs for history? Or do you have a way history buff Super Bowl rematch of Buffalo and Washington from way back in the early 90s, one of the Buffalo's losses? Or do you have some other combination? Who do you have
I'll give you the
Super Bowl?
Yeah, I'll give you the non-traditional one that I think Philadelphia will put an end to Washington's run. It's been nice, and it's been a story that's reinvigorated that fan base. But I think Philadelphia has come together late in the season, unexpectedly stronger than I thought they would be going into this playoff. They have learned.
They're not just relying on Saquon because he was doing.
They're not just relying on Saquon. They've learned from last year when they just kind of ended up there and then got embarrassed by Tampa in the first round. So I think Philadelphia will at home move on. And you'll drag me for it after they lose, but I have no confidence in this. But if it's not now Buffalo, I don't know when it is.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's true. Yeah,
right. Kansas, and it's like if it's not now, I'm going to say they're going to win, and then I'm going to be like, when they don't, then I'll be like, of course not. Like I get, they played the game in both places. They generally it's been in Kansas City. It's been in different. Sometimes the divisional,
in the regular season,
AFC Championship. Played in the regular season. 13-second game. We know all the history and everything. 13 seconds overtime, coin flip. Whole 9 yards. And if it's not this year against the weakest looking Kansas City Chiefs 14+ win team that we've ever seen, I don't know what it is. Because Kansas City doesn't look dominant. They just do things to win football games. They're not.
They look better now though than they were earlier in the season. They're looking better now. But I actually think Buffalo is going to win. I'm picking Buffalo.
Okay. I'm picking Buffalo to win almost out of spite here, just because if there's a time for them to get it, it's got to be now. Now is the most gettable that the Chiefs are ever going to be. And if not, then the Chiefs have a chance to go and do something that no modern NFL team has ever do and win 3 straight championships. But if it's not now for Buffalo, I don't know when it is. I really don't.
And winning 3 straight Super Bowls, not even championships, because I know Green Bay did it, but winning 3 straight Super Bowls, I'll say this too, winning 3 straight Super Bowls and the one they won before, because that'll be 4 with Mahomes. Not only is he right there for GOAT, even though Brady has more rings, but doing it in a clump of time. And then second of all,
we're the greatest stretch of team success in the history of the league.
it'd be 100% in this era, because the NFL is such an ever-moving machine where no one can ever keep the same roster. They lost Hill after the first ring, and they don't even have another elite receiver, and they're just churning the wheel onward. And Mahomes is still putting up numbers, even if maybe they're not what they were before. He's still elite, and he's still one of the best QBs. Kelsey's not what he was before, but he's still right there putting up numbers, and they're just finding a way. Andy Reid was an afterthought and fired, and the Eagles did what the Steelers are afraid to do with Mike Tomlin and finally move on for their Hall of Fame coach. And then he ends up coaching this and winning with a quarterback that nobody thought would be this. He was an afterthought in the Big 12. West Virginia beat him, for crying out loud. And then he gets here into the NFL and becomes one of the GOAT, if not arguing with Brady for quarterback wise. But if the Chiefs go 3 straight Super Bowls, 3 straight Super Bowl wins, and 4 rings overall for Mahomes and that group, for Andy Reid and Kelsey and that group, 7 straight conference championship game appearances, losing to Brady way back, but basically owning it since then. They have the win that you want in those, head to head with Brady. greatest dynasty of all time in the NFL, and maybe the greatest dynasty of all time in pro sports.
Well,
I
and that's
mean, when
when
you're talking
people
about in this era
when you
doing
had
this,
people
I
when
do
you had
think
people after
Buffalo's
they
going to
won
finally knock them off. But if they do it again,
when you had people talking about after they won last year about Patrick Mahomes, like, hey, he could get to 7. Like, it's why it wasn't hyperbole. Like, it's just you keep the system going with as good as that team is, as good as they've been, and to do it in this non-traditional way where they don't have the Tyreek Hills, they don't have the flashy skill players like they've had in past seasons, and they're just grinding it out in a different
Brady and
way.
Belichick did not win 3 in a row.
No, nobody has.
So,
Nobody's won 3 Super Bowls in a row.
No, nobody has. But I mean, Brady and Belichick, that's the greatest dynasty. That's the run. Obviously, did it with many different variations of the Patriots. They have the the 6 rings with Brady with Belichick and Brady together with the Patriots, and then Brady won 7 overall with Tampa 2. But they didn't do 3 in a row. They even had a brief middle there where they kind of weren't as much of a contender. The Chiefs, they just keep churning it, and 3 straight. I don't think we'd ever see this again in this much of a parity-driven league. Unlike even if you don't care about Super Bowls versus NFL titles, when the Packers won their 3 in a row NFL title and back-to-back Super Bowls, it was the same roster. You couldn't get rid of anybody. They bogarted everything. Same roster. Today, you can't do that. The league has parity. They want you not to win 3 straight because of a draft. If you're bad, they reward you with a top pick. They make it harder for a Patriots, Belichick, and Brady run. They make it harder for this Reed Mahomes run, now potentially winning 3 straight Super Bowls, or even really to get there 3 in a row would be ridiculous. But certainly to win 3 straight, it would be the greatest dynasty in NFL history. It would argue and maybe would be the greatest dynasty in pro sports history. Because if you want to talk about the Yankees of the 90s or the Montreal Canadiens way back or the Lakers or Celtics or Bill Russell and all his rings or Yogi Berra and all that, George, there either were less teams or the Yankees were buying titles with no salary cap. This is a parity-driven league with a lot of teams. It's all the way fair. Everyone's playing by the same rules. I mean, there's teams in easier divisions than they've been in, even though maybe it's not the hardest in the world. And yeah, this is a weaker team. This is the year to get him. But I think Josh Allen's playing better than Mahomes this year. I think the Bills have been playing better than the Chiefs this year. They had the head-to-head win this year. They've been close in every game. Josh Allen's never been the problem. He's played well in these playoff games, even though they've lost. I do think this is finally the year they do it. I do. I mean, we've seen a lot of curses eventually go down, and them getting there wouldn't be enough. They would have to win. They'd have pressure to win. But even getting there would be a freaking really big deal in this era. And I think it finally goes down. If it doesn't, then the Chiefs are absolutely vying and arguing for greatest dynasty. But I think it finally goes down. I do think Philadelphia as well with Saquon does enough. I think the Washington run ends. And my last point that I will say, that even if, because people are also bringing up now, and I saw Bill Cowher brought this up, that if Jaden Daniels takes him to a Super Bowl, it's the greatest rookie year ever, at least in the modern time. It's better than Big Ben if they go. Even if they don't go, it's better. Because Ben was not asked to do nearly enough in comparison to what Daniels is asked to do. If Daniels has a bad game, Washington can't even compete. They're not going to have a chance. He's been what RG3 was times 10. He's been arguably an MVP type of candidate, certainly at the end of the season to now. He's that pure dual threat as an NFL player who also can throw. He is that elite player that is carrying them there and making them this sensation and storybook story. And yes, it takes a team, but he's by far the MVP and the best. When Ben was riding the Steelers to an AFC championship game appearance, and then they would win a title in his second year, he was okay at times and had his moments, but he had the worst quarterback rating ever for a champion when he did win. And he was on a great defensive team that was ground and pound in an old era that just was a great defensive team. He didn't have to do nearly what Jaden Daniels has to do right now. So this is already the greatest rookie run, certainly of this century. You could argue with Marino's, but even if he doesn't go to the Super Bowl, this is it for me already, the greatest. But I do think Philadelphia trips them up. But you have a curse trying to get down the greatest dynasty, and you have a division rivalry. I'm not sure what anyone else could want here for Conference Championship weekend.
We got a good 4. We got a good championship weekend ahead.
Unfortunately, though, George is picking what I want with the Bills, and it's probably not going to happen now because I do want the Bills to win this.
I'm as you heard, I'm less apathetic toward it. So
You're a bigger curse than the Bills. I
if
gotta
not
say.
now, when Buffalo? If not now, when?
Well, maybe it just never. I mean, it's been
I
never
know,
for.
yeah. It's going to be
I mean,
never at this point.
it could just be never.
Beat Lamar Jackson. Went through all that. Can you figure it out now? No, we'll see. We will see, Buffalo. That puts a nice bow on this edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. A reminder to find us wherever you get your podcast. Search Howitzer in Apple, YouTube, TuneIn, Spotify, and more. Howitzer to find us there. Also, check out the Hyphen Podcast Group, a Morgantown, West Virginia-based podcast collective delivering great podcasts to the people. HyphenPodcastGroup.com and on social. And shout out to B Hyphen, whose music you hear right here on the HBS each and every episode.
Also, find us on social at House of Buzzside, Gerbo3 at Mike Asti 11. Everywhere we go, the HBS is kicking it into gear here in 2025. So if you can't find us, you're just not trying hard enough. And I would imagine we have another asinine sports year ahead. I'd imagine there's going to be an asinine topics to discuss here on the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. So much to look forward to.
This has been another edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show, where we conquer brackets, ballots, and sports radio.
One day at a time.